Hello guys, welcome to Vision Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if mandatory Hogwarts health scan found 127 compulsion charms on Harry and Dumbledore lost his magic? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Scan. The Great Hall had never felt quite so much like a courtroom. Harry noticed it the moment he walked in that September morning. The unfamiliar tables pushed to the walls, the rows of plain wooden chairs arranged in neat lines across the stone floor, the cluster of lime green robes near the staff table that meant ministry officials. The enchanted ceiling showed a gray, overcast sky, the kind that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or just threaten to all day. It felt appropriate somehow, though Harry couldn't have said why. "What's all this?" Ron muttered beside him, craning his neck to see over the heads of the Hufflepuff fourth years filing in ahead of them. "Health screening," Hermione said, with the tone of someone who had already read the memo twice and cross-referenced it with 3 additional sources. "The Ministry passed the educational decree last month. Mandatory magical health assessments for all Hogwarts students, beginning of term. I sent you both the notice in August." "You sent 17 notices," Ron said. "I thought it was about Quidditch scheduling." "Why would I send you 17 notices about Quidditch scheduling?" "I don't know, Hermione, why do you do most things?" Harry wasn't really listening. He was watching the lime green robes sort themselves into a professional-looking formation near what appeared to be a row of diagnostic pedestals, smooth, pale stone columns about waist height, each one humming faintly with stored magic. Beside them stood a woman with a clipboard that kept rewriting itself, a pair of St. Mungo's healers in white, and, standing slightly apart from everyone else like a cat that had wandered into a dog show and was enjoying it enormously, Dolores Umbridge. She hadn't changed since the hearing. Same toad-like face, same too-wide smile, same pink cardigan that managed to look both aggressively cheerful and vaguely threatening. She was watching the students file in with small, satisfied eyes, and when those eyes found Harry, her smile stretched just a fraction wider. Harry looked away. He felt the usual twist of dislike in his gut, which had been a reliable presence since the moment he'd met her, and filed into a seat between Ron and Hermione without giving her the satisfaction of a second glance. Dumbledore stood at the front of the room near the staff table. He was watching the proceedings with his usual expression of benign, distant amusement, robes the color of deep ocean water, half-moon glasses catching the pale morning light. He looked, as he always looked, like the most comfortable person in any room he occupied. Like a man who had already read the last page of the book and found it satisfactory. Something about that expression made Harry's jaw tighten. He didn't know why. It usually reassured him. Professor McGonagall stood 2 feet to Dumbledore's left and was watching the ministry officials with the look she usually reserved for students who'd attempted to transfigure things they had explicitly been told not to transfigure. Her mouth was a thin line. She had clearly not been consulted about the seating arrangements, the equipment configuration, or possibly the entire event. "Good morning," Umbridge said, stepping forward. Her voice carried that horrible combination of honeyed sweetness and bureaucratic authority that made Harry's skin prickle. She didn't use a sonorous charm, she didn't need one. The hall had gone quiet the moment she moved, the way rooms went quiet around people who held power you hadn't agreed to give them. Students of Hogwarts. As per Educational Decree No. 22, approved by the Minister for Magic, the Department of Magical Education, and the Committee for Underage Magical Welfare, you will each undergo a standard magical health assessment today. The process is entirely painless, takes approximately 2 minutes per student, and is completely mandatory. She paused to let that last word land. The assessments will check for standard magical development, residual spell contamination, accidental magic scarring, and any active enchantments operating on or within your person. Results are recorded by the Ministry and will be used solely for educational welfare purposes. Like they used the records from the Triwizard selection solely for educational welfare purposes, Ron murmured from Harry's left, just quietly enough. Harry almost smiled. Almost. The process began with the first years, which meant Harry had time to watch. Each student was called up individually, walked to one of the pale stone pedestals, and asked to place both hands flat on the surface. The pedestal would pulse with light, blue for baseline magical ability, the healers explained cheerfully, and a small scroll of parchment would extrude from the side with the results. The whole thing took about 90 seconds. Most students stepped back looking mildly interested, a few looking bored, and one second-year Hufflepuff who apparently had an unresolved jellylegs jinx still active from last June looking mortified. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. The kind of bureaucratic exercise that generated paperwork and justified someone's departmental budget. Harry watched the pedestals with vague, unfocused attention. Beside him, Hermione was already making notes on a fresh sheet of parchment, comparing the scroll readouts she could see from this distance to something she seemed to have memorized. Ron had found a chocolate frog card in his pocket from what appeared to be some time in 1994 and was studying the back with the expression of someone who had made an important archaeological discovery. By the time the fifth years were called up, the whole thing had taken on the rhythm of a long queue at the post office. Harry stood when his row was directed forward, walked to the nearest pedestal between Neville Longbottom and a Ravenclaw girl whose name he couldn't remember, and placed his hands flat on the cool stone surface. The pedestal pulsed. Blue light, as expected. Then it pulsed again. A slightly different shade, more violet than blue, deeper and more saturated, with a strange trembling quality to it, like light seen through disturbed water. Then it pulsed a third time, and the light turned white. Blazing, absolute white, so bright that the students nearest to Harry stepped back, shading their eyes. The hum that had been barely audible background noise since they walked in suddenly rose in pitch, becoming a sound that Harry felt in his back teeth and the bones of his wrists. The parchment scroll that had begun extruding from the side of the pedestal kept coming. And kept coming. It spooled out across the floor like a long white tongue, covered in text so dense it was nearly black, and still it came, curling against the stone. The healer nearest to Harry, a young man with tired eyes and a St. Mungo's badge that said trainee, took one look at his equipment, made a sound in the back of his throat and turned to his colleague. "Madam Finch," he said carefully. "Madam Finch, you should, I see it," said Madam Finch, who was older and whose expression had shifted from professional to something that was trying very hard not to become alarmed. She stepped forward and peered at the pedestal, then at Harry, then back at the pedestal. She tapped her wand against the side of the column in a quick diagnostic pattern. The column responded with a sound like a tuning fork struck too hard. Umbridge had noticed. Harry could see her making her way across the hall, pink cardigan cutting through the crowd of students with the determined efficiency of a boat through fog. "Is there a problem?" she asked, arriving beside Madam Finch with her clipboard held at a brisk, important angle. "I'm not entirely sure yet," Madam Finch said, in the tone of someone who was entirely sure and didn't like it one bit. She tapped the pedestal again. "Mr. Potter, can you tell me, have you had any unusual magical experiences recently? Any difficulty controlling accidental magic? Nightmares with strong emotional components?" Harry blinked. "I mean. Yes. But that's," he gestured vaguely at his forehead, at the scar that everyone in the room had already noted and catalogued. "That's pretty normal for me." "The scar is registering, yes," Madam Finch said. "That's not what's triggering the reading." She looked at Umbridge, then past her at the senior ministry official, a tall, narrow-faced man named Williamson who'd been standing near the door looking bored since 7:30 this morning and was no longer looking bored. "We have active enchantment contamination," Madam Finch said, and her voice had dropped to something that was professionally calm in the way that emergency calm is calm, held in place by training and necessity. "Multiple active enchantments. Operating on the subject's person." "How many?" Williamson asked, crossing the room in 4 quick strides. Madam Finch looked at the scroll still curling across the floor. She bent down, scanned the dense text, and her face went very still. 127, she said. The great hall didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a ripple, starting from the students nearest to Harry's pedestal and moving outward like a stone dropped in still water, until the only sounds were the scrolls still scritching against the floor and the high, persistent hum of the column, and somewhere near the Gryffindor table, a quill dropping and clattering against a chair. Ron had stood up. Harry could see him standing between chairs, very still, face blank in the way that meant he was processing something too big for his expression to handle yet. Hermione was on her feet too, her parchment forgotten, one hand pressed over her mouth. 120, Umbridge stopped. Cleared her throat. What precisely is the nature of these enchantments? Madame Finch had her wand out now and was running it over Harry in a series of precise movements, reading the color and texture of the light it produced the way a doctor reads test results, efficiently, quickly, with a growing stillness that was its own kind of answer. Compulsion charms, she said. The majority of them are compulsion charms. I'm also reading emotional suppression work, several memory modifiers, and something I've never personally seen before, which appears to be a loyalty binding construct anchored to. She stopped. Anchored to what? Williamson said sharply. Madame Finch turned very slowly and looked toward the staff table. Toward Dumbledore. The old wizard had not moved. He stood exactly where he'd been standing when Harry walked in, hands folded, half-moon glasses catching the grey light from above. But something had changed in his expression. The comfortable distance was gone. In its place was something that Harry, in the brief, confused glimpse he caught before looking away, couldn't quite name. It was old. It was complicated. It looked, more than anything, like a man looking at the edge of a cliff he had been walking toward for a very long time, and finding it closer than expected. The enchantments are anchored to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Madame Finch said, and her voice was perfectly professional and gave away nothing except that she was working very hard to make it do so. They are actively maintained by his magical core. They are feeding off it. For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then Harry said, "What?" It came out quiet. That was the strange thing, he'd expected to feel something volcanic, some immediate rush of fury or betrayal or grief, but what he actually felt, in that first moment, was a peculiar and profound confusion. Like the floor had shifted 2 inches to the left. Like the room he'd been standing in his whole life had just revealed a false wall. "Mr. Potter," Madame Finch said carefully, "I need you to remain very still." "I'm still," Harry said. He was. He was absolutely still, both hands still flat on the pedestal, the blazing white light still pouring from the column, the scroll still unspooling across the floor in dense black text. His voice sounded strange to him. Distant. Like someone else was using it. What does a compulsion charm do, exactly? When it's been there a long time. What does it do? Madame Finch glanced at her colleague. Something passed between them. A compulsion charm, she said, choosing her words with the visible care of someone picking their way through broken glass, influences behavior. Choices. Emotional responses. Long-term, layered compulsion work can affect memory formation, instinct, the way a person interprets information. It can affect, she paused. It can affect a person's sense of who they are. Harry took that in. He looked at the scroll on the floor. 127. The number felt like something from someone else's story. Something you read about in a history of magic textbook. Something that happened to other people, in other centuries. He looked up at Dumbledore. The headmaster met his eyes. There was no deflection in it, no quick look away. Dumbledore held Harry's gaze with that same complicated, unreadable expression, and Harry realized, with the sudden clarity of a light switched on in a dark room, that he was waiting for the compulsion charms to smooth this over. Waiting for the familiar internal voice that had always, his entire life, told him that Dumbledore had his reasons, that Dumbledore knew best, that this wasn't something to get angry about, that trust was the appropriate response. The voice didn't come. It was the absence of it that cracked something open. "Professor," Harry said, and the word came out differently than it ever had before, stripped of the habitual deference, flat and direct and terrifyingly honest. "Did you do this?" The hall was absolute silence. Dumbledore's hands unfolded from their resting position. He drew a breath. "Harry, that's not an answer." Another breath. "The situation is considerably more. Did you put 127 compulsion charms on me?" Harry said, and his voice was steady in a way that was its own kind of dangerous, yes or no. Somewhere behind Harry, he heard Hermione make a sound. He didn't look. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore, on that old, weathered face, on those blue eyes that had always seemed to hold something warm and wise and safe, and he watched Albus Dumbledore, for possibly the first time in his life, struggle to find the right words. "Not all at once," Dumbledore said, quietly. "And not, the motivations behind each were, Merlin's teeth," said someone near the back of the hall. It might have been a seventh-year Hufflepuff. It might have been a professor. In the silence, it didn't matter. Umbridge had gone very still in a completely different way than Madame Finch had gone still. Madame Finch was the stillness of professional shock. Umbridge's stillness was the stillness of a predator watching an entirely unexpected opportunity arrange itself in front of her. Her small eyes were moving between Harry and Dumbledore with the quick, calculating precision of someone totaling up numbers. "I want them removed," Harry said. "Now. All of them." "Harry." Dumbledore took a step forward. "The removal process requires care. The enchantments are deeply integrated, some of them have been in place since you were," he stopped. "Since I was what?" Harry said. His hands pressed flat against the pedestal. The white light pulsed. The hum climbed half a step in pitch. "Since I was a baby. Since I was a toddler. How old was I, Professor, when you decided I needed to be managed?" "Managed is not, how old." McGonagall made a sound. She had one hand pressed flat against her chest and was looking at Dumbledore with an expression that was doing 6 terrible things at once. She looked the way a building looks in the moment before it understands it is going to fall. "Some of the earliest work dates to approximately your 14th month, Madame Finch said, almost to herself, reading from her wand's diagnostic output. "Several of the constructs are, they've been woven into the baseline magical development. They grew with him." She looked up, and her professional composure had slipped enough that real horror was showing around the edges. "They grew with his magic." The pedestal under Harry's hands gave a sharp, resonant crack. Not a structural crack, nothing broke. But the stone surface split a long thin line from where Harry's right hand rested to the base of the column, tracing the path of something being strained past its tolerance, and the white light spiked upward in a column so bright that every student in the 3 nearest rows flinched back. Harry hadn't done it deliberately. He knew that because there was no deliberate intent in him right now, there was only that enormous, gathering, blank feeling of understanding something so large it hadn't finished arriving yet. Something that had no name because he'd been built without the language to describe it. 14 months old. He had been 14 months old. "Williamson," Umbridge said quietly, her voice carrying a careful authority that Harry had never heard in it before, like she'd just flipped a switch from bureaucratic pleasant to something considerably more focused. "I want a full ministry investigation team here within the hour. I want the Wisengamot notified. I want," she paused, and the pause had weight. "I want Dumbledore's authority at this school suspended pending investigation." "You cannot," McGonagall began. "Educational Decree 14 grants me authority over all staff conduct where ministry welfare concerns are involved," Umbridge said smoothly. "And 127 compulsion charms on a minor constitutes a welfare concern." Her eyes found Dumbledore and stayed there, and the satisfaction in them was honest enough that it was almost refreshing. She wasn't pretending this wasn't exactly what she'd wanted. "I think you should step away from the students, Albus." Dumbledore looked at her. Then he looked at Harry. Then he looked down at his own hands, those long, clever hands that had shaped half of Wizarding Britain's modern history, and something changed. It was small, at first. A flicker. Like a candle in a draught. A barely perceptible dimming of the quality of light around him, Not literal light, but the ambient sense of power that a very great wizard carried with them the way tall buildings carried their own weather. Dumbledore had always been warm with it, dense with it, the most powerful person in any room he stood in without any particular effort. It was as natural as gravity. It flickered. Harry felt it. Every magical person in the room felt it, the collective slightly disoriented feeling of something large and reliable shifting, the way you feel when a generator you've been hearing as background hum for so long you stop noticing it suddenly changes pitch. Madam Finch was watching the readout from her diagnostic wand, and her face had gone very careful. "The removal is beginning," she said, quietly, to no one in particular. "The compulsion constructs, when they're exposed by a scan, they start degrading. They're designed to operate invisibly. Now that they've been publicly documented, the anchor enchantments are destabilizing." "What does that mean for the caster?" Williamson asked. Madam Finch's quiet stretched a half-second too long. "Each compulsion construct that collapses takes back the magic that was maintaining it," she said. "The caster gets it back. In theory." "In theory," Williamson repeated. "In practice, constructs this old, this integrated, the magical feedback from a sudden destabilization can be." She appeared to select from a range of words and choose the one that was most professional without being inaccurate. "Significant." Dumbledore had sat down. Harry noted this because Dumbledore never sat down in public, he stood, always, with the easy authority of a man entirely comfortable in his own power. He had sat down in one of the plain wooden chairs arranged for the students, and he looked, in the grey morning light, suddenly much older than he ever had before. His hands were shaking. Not dramatically. Just slightly, at the fingers. Barely visible. But Harry had looked at those hands countless times across the headmaster's desk, steady and authoritative and warm, and the sight of them trembling sent a cold feeling climbing his spine that was something other than anger. He didn't know what it was yet. He wasn't ready to know. "I need to begin the removal process," Madam Finch said, turning to Harry with a focus that pointedly excluded everyone else in the room. "Mr. Potter. We should move you to the hospital wing. This is not," she gestured at the silent, staring hall full of students and staff and ministry officials, "this is not an appropriate environment for a therapeutic medical procedure." "Do it here," Harry said. "Mr. Potter, here," Harry said again. "I'd like there to be witnesses." Madam Finch looked at him for a long moment. She was, he realized, trying to read him, trying to assess whether he was in shock, whether he was dangerous, whether the boy standing at the pedestal with both hands pressed to cracked stone and white light pouring up around him was stable enough to make that decision. Whatever she saw in his face, she nodded. "All right," she said. "But the students need to move back." The students needed several authoritative repetitions of this instruction and the physical assistance of at least 4 professors before they complied. They didn't go quietly. The noise level in the hall, which had been breathlessly silent, broke open into 1,000 overlapping voices the moment anyone started moving, and Harry stood at the center of it all, hands still on the pedestal, watching the room rearrange itself around him and feeling, strangely, like he was doing this for the first time. Watching people without wanting them to like him. Watching a situation unfold without the automatic instinct to smooth it over, to defer, to be grateful, to not cause trouble. He was watching it with something he didn't have a name for yet, something clear and very cold and entirely his own, and it was the most unfamiliar feeling he'd ever had. Which was its own kind of devastating. Ron had fought his way through the moving crowd to Harry's side. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder with Harry the way he had on 100 occasions, and Harry was aware of him with a sudden fierce clarity, the realness of him, the uncomplicated, unmanipulated solidity of Ron Weasley just standing beside him because that was where he'd decided to be. No one had charmed Ron here. Ron had walked here himself. "You all right?" Ron said, low. "No," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron said. "Didn't think so. I'm staying here." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Harry breathed out. Something very small and very tight in his chest loosened the tiniest possible amount. Hermione arrived on his other side 30 seconds later, parchment still in hand, face pale and set with the particular determination that meant she had felt the ground shift under her feet and had chosen to keep walking anyway. She didn't say anything either. She took his arm, just briefly, in a grip that was slightly too tight and then released it, and that was Hermione's version of everything she couldn't find words for, and Harry understood it. "Ready?" Madam Finch asked. The hall had cleared back enough to give them a 20-foot radius. Professors lined the sides, McGonagall rigid, watching, Sprout with her hands clasped, Flitwick looking like he might cry, Snape with an expression of such perfectly calibrated blankness that it required enormous effort to maintain. Near the doors, Umbridge stood with Williamson and a growing cluster of ministry officials who had produced clipboards and quick quotes quills with remarkable speed. Dumbledore sat in his plain wooden chair, very still, hands in his lap. "Ready," Harry said. Madam Finch placed her wand at Harry's left temple, where the diagnostic had showed the highest concentration of active workings, and spoke the first removal incantation in a low, steady voice. What happened next would be talked about for decades. The first charm came out like a hook. That was the only way Harry's mind could describe it afterward, a sharp, cold removal, like a splinter drawn out of flesh, except the splinter was something he hadn't known was in him and its removal left a space that immediately began to fill with something. He couldn't name the something. It was sharp-edged and warm and strange. It was, he would realize much later, his own perspective on a situation he had never been allowed to assess clearly. By the 10th charm, the light from the pedestal was throwing his shadow long across the hall floor. By the 20th, Harry had begun to sweat, hands still flat on stone, the crack in the pedestal widened now, the column humming at a frequency that was more vibration than sound. He could feel each removal distinctly, the compulsions had different textures, different weights. Some came out gently, old and deeply embedded, leaving behind a floating, disoriented feeling. Others came out fast and sharp, and in their wake left a rush of something that felt like surfacing from deep water. At charm number 31, Harry felt something change fundamentally. He didn't understand it at first. Madam Finch paused, checking her readings, and Harry stood at the pedestal and felt the hall around him in a way he never had before, felt the magic in the castle walls, the warmth of it, the age of it, and underneath his own hands, in his own chest, something that had been packed in small and manageable his entire life was beginning, very slowly, to expand. Like a fist unclenching. Like something drawing its first real breath. At charm 47, he turned his head and looked at Dumbledore. The old wizard met his gaze. His hands were no longer just trembling, they were still, with the stillness of someone who has stopped trying to control something because the effort is too great. The ambient sense of power had dimmed considerably. He looked like a very old man who happened to be wearing magnificent robes. He looked, beneath the silver beard and the ancient, complicated eyes, like someone who had made a decision he was only now beginning to understand the full cost of. Harry held his gaze for 3 seconds. He didn't feel anger, exactly. He felt something that was larger than anger and more durable, something that didn't need to burn to stay lit. He turned back to the healer. "Keep going," he said. Madam Finch kept going. By charm 80, the crack in the pedestal had become a fracture network that climbed the full height of the column. The white light had gone beyond white into something that was barely visible, the way some sounds are beyond hearing, you felt it rather than saw it. 3 of the other pedestals had gone dark. Every enchanted clock in the great hall had stopped. The enchanted ceiling, which had been showing its grey indecisive sky all morning, shifted without anyone instructing it to, and showed something else, a sky just before a storm breaks, that particular greenish electric quality of air that is about to change. Several of the younger students had been quietly shepherded out of the hall by now. The remaining professors, the ministry officials, and the 5th year and older students who had refused to leave stood in their cleared circle and watched. Ron hadn't moved. Hermione had taken out a fresh piece of parchment and was writing. He understood this too, this was how Hermione survived things, by documenting them, by making the unbearable into data that could be organized and responded to. He didn't mind. The scratching of her quill was, in its small way, a comfort. Charm number 100 arrived and Harry felt it come out of him like a tooth being extracted. This one had been deep. This one had been very old and very fundamental, and it had had its fingers in something he'd barely been aware of, a particular way of understanding his own worth, or lack of it. A specific, deeply embedded certainty that his own needs were secondary. That causing inconvenience was worse than accepting harm. That the appropriate response to being hurt by people with power over you was gratitude for the parts of it that hadn't hurt yet. When it left, the space it occupied filled up with something that was almost frightening in its clarity. Harry straightened up from the pedestal. He hadn't realized he'd been hunching, bent slightly forward, braced, the way you brace against cold or pain. He straightened fully, and the thing in his chest that had been unclenching did something else, something that wasn't metaphor, something he felt in his physical hands and the soles of his feet and the back of his eyes. He was 5'8". He had his mother's eyes and his father's hair and a scar that had been defining him since before he could walk. He had, in the past 5 years, faced a possessed professor, a basilisk, a tournament designed to kill him, and a dark wizard who'd been trying to murder him since infancy. He had done all of that with 127 hooks in him, steering him like a barge on a canal. He was curious what he could do without them. 27 remaining, Madame Finch said, and her voice was tight with exhaustion and something very close to awe. The final cluster, they're the oldest ones, Mr. Potter. They may be, remove them, Harry said. She looked at him. The final removal may cause a significant magical discharge. I can't predict the magnitude. Remove them. She removed them. The last 27 came out in a rush that Harry had no clean metaphor for. They came out like a dam breaking. They came out like waking up. They came out like every answer you'd been searching for arriving simultaneously, too fast to process, an information flood that had no shape yet because the shape was still forming. He felt them leave, 1, 2, 5, 11, 17, 27, and with each one, the thing in his chest expanded further, 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 until it was pressing at the inside of his ribs and the inside of his skull and the inside of his hands against the stone. The column shattered. Not explosively, it didn't send shards flying. It simply came apart, the fracture network completing itself, the stone separating cleanly along every line that had formed in the past 2 hours, and the fragments settled onto the floor with a series of soft, final sounds. The white light didn't go out when the column broke. It stayed, suspended, for approximately 3 seconds, a column of cold brilliance that lit every face in the hall in sharp relief, that threw no shadows because it came from everywhere at once, and then it folded inward, back to its source, and was gone. Harry stood where the pedestal had been. His hands were at his sides. His breathing was even. The hall was completely silent. He could feel everything differently. The castle was alive around him in a way it had never been before. He could feel the warmth of it like a familiar, the 400 years of magic worked into the walls and floors and arches. He could feel the 30-odd magical signatures of the people in the room, the familiar shapes of Ron and Hermione beside him, the carefully neutral blankness of Snape across the circle, the diminished but still complex signature of Dumbledore in his chair. He could feel his own magic. For the first time in his life, he could feel all of it, the full extent of it, uncompressed and unmanaged and enormous. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't wild. It was like feeling your own heartbeat, something that had always been there but that you'd only just learned to register. He turned, slowly, and looked at Dumbledore. The old wizard had risen from his chair at some point during the final removals. He stood with one hand on its back for support, a slight, unfamiliar need for support, as if his balance had changed. The magic that had always emanated from him like a second sun had dropped to something barely above ambient. He looked, quite simply, like an elderly man. Harry walked toward him. The cleared circle opened to let him through, people stepping back instinctively, and he was distantly aware that this was new too, people stepping out of his way not because of his fame but because of something they were reading in how he moved, something that said clearly and without aggression that there was something present here that hadn't been present before. He stopped 3 feet from Dumbledore. Up close, the headmaster's eyes were still sharp. Still blue. Still complicated with all the intelligence and grief and calculation that a century and a half of living had installed in them. But the comfortable distance was gone, entirely. What was left was a very old, very clever man who had done something that he had believed, completely, was necessary, and who was now standing in the full unfiltered gaze of the person he'd done it to, for the first time. "How long," Harry said, "were you going to wait to tell me?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long, quiet moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. Quieter than its usual warmth, but steady. "I wasn't sure you needed to know," he said. "I believed the necessary outcome. You charmed me," Harry said. 127 times. "You made me think that the thoughts I was having were mine. You made me feel that the choices I was making were choices." He paused. "You made me into something I wasn't and called it protection." Dumbledore's jaw moved. "Harry, I'm not angry at you," Harry said, and the frightening thing was that it was true. Or rather, the anger was there, enormous and fully present, but it was underneath something else now, something colder and clearer and more purposeful. I think I'm going to be very angry at you. But right now I'm standing here trying to work out who I actually am, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't say anything else for a while." He turned away from Dumbledore and found, standing in the middle of the cleared circle, that the hall was watching him with the stillness of people who have just watched something they don't have the category for yet. Students, professors, ministry officials, all of them arranged in their positions like pieces on a board. Harry looked at all of them. He looked at Umbridge, who was watching him with those small, bright eyes, doing her calculations. He looked at Williamson, who was clutching his clipboard with slightly more force than necessary. He looked at McGonagall, whose expression had completed its collapse and come out the other side as something that was, simply and cleanly, guilt. She looked at Harry and did not look away from what she found there. He looked at the scroll on the floor, the endless scroll of parchment, covered in black text, curling across the stone from where the pedestal had been. 127. "Right," Harry said, and his voice carried without any effort at all, filling the hall the way sound fills stone rooms, natural and sure. "I'd like someone to explain to me exactly how long wizarding law permits this to have been happening before it becomes a crime." Umbridge opened her mouth. "Someone competent," Harry added. She closed it. Ron made a sound that was definitely not a laugh. Hermione, from somewhere behind him, pressed her lips together very hard and kept writing. Outside, the enchanted ceiling finally made its decision. The storm broke, rain hitting the castle's high windows in sheets, dramatic and inevitable, the way things that have been threatening to happen for a very long time eventually do. Harry stood in the middle of the great hall, in the middle of the mess of a life that had been built for him, and for the first time felt, with the full clarity of an unclouded mind, exactly what he was going to do about it. Chapter 2, The unraveling. The hospital wing at midnight smelled like Dittany and cold stone and the particular kind of quiet that only exists in places where serious things have happened and the people in them are trying to decide what to do next. Harry sat on the edge of a bed at the far end of the room, back straight, hands loose in his lap, watching Madame Pomfrey move between two cluttered workbenches with the focused efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what Hogwarts sent her way. She'd been surprised today, though. Harry had seen it, a brief, unguarded flicker when she'd read Madame Finch's transfer notes, her hands going still on the parchment for just a moment before she composed herself and resumed being competent. The removal process had ended 6 hours ago. The Great Hall had been cleared, statements taken, ministry officials dispatched with their clipboards and their quick quotes quills and their varying degrees of controlled panic. Harry had walked to the hospital wing under his own power, flanked by a Madame Finch who kept taking diagnostic readings every 3 minutes and a Ron Weasley who kept not saying things with the focused intensity of someone saying many things. Hermione had been redirected by McGonagall to the Gryffindor common room. She'd gone, but not before pressing a roll of parchment into Harry's hands that contained, in her tight precise handwriting, every detail of every enchantment that had been read aloud during the assessment. 23 pages. Front and back. She'd written it all down in real time, in the chaos of the Great Hall, without missing a single specification. He'd read it twice in the past 2 hours. He kept returning to specific lines. Charm 14, instilled aversion response to independent authority structures. Charm 31, suppression of natural occlumency development. Charm 58, reinforced deferential response to Albus Dumbledore specifically. Charm 89, emotional dampening of rage response to perceived injustices. Charm 102, loyalty binding to the Order of the Phoenix pre-membership. Pre-membership. He hadn't even been asked to join. He'd been charmed to want to before the question was ever put to him. "You should sleep," Madame Pomfrey said, appearing beside him with the abrupt practicality of someone who had been working up to saying this for some time. "I'm not tired," Harry said. "You've had 127 enchantments removed from your magical core in a single afternoon. You are very much tired." "I'm very much awake," Harry said, which was true in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His mind felt like a room that had just had all its furniture moved, not empty, not damaged, just completely and bewilderingly rearranged. Everything he looked at from the inside had a slightly different quality to it, like looking at a familiar street from the opposite direction. The same elements. Different angles. Pomfrey gave him the look she reserved for students who were technically correct but practically being foolish, set a calming draught on the bedside table that he hadn't asked for, and went back to her workbench. Harry looked at the mirror in his hands. It was the two-way communication mirror Sirius had given him in 4th year, which he had not used until now because, and this landed differently when he thought about it with a clear mind, because he'd felt guilty about using it. About bothering Sirius. About taking up space in a man's attention when that man was a fugitive with more important things to worry about. He had felt, with complete certainty, that using the mirror would be selfish. Charm 8, Hermione's note said. Suppression of self-worth in interpersonal contexts. Subject consistently deprioritizes own needs in favor of others' comfort. He turned the mirror over in his hands. Its surface was dark, reflective, showing him his own face in the low light of the hospital wing. He looked the same. That was the strange thing. He looked exactly the same as he had this morning, and this morning he had been a completely different person, and you couldn't see the difference at all. "Sirius," he said to the mirror. Nothing for a moment. Then the surface shifted, the reflection clearing and reorganizing, and Sirius Black's face appeared, unshaven, dark-eyed, looking like he'd been pacing for 6 hours, which he probably had. "Harry." The relief in his voice was undisguised and total. "Harry, I've been, Dumbledore's lot sent word, Remus is here, we've been," he stopped. Looked at Harry properly, through the mirror's slight distortion. His expression changed. "You look different." "I'm told I look the same." "You don't." Sirius studied him with those sharp, dark eyes. "You look, I don't know. You look like James used to look when someone made him genuinely angry. That specific quiet thing he'd do." A pause. "Are you all right?" "I'm working on it," Harry said. "Sirius, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Always. Did you know?" The question sat in the air between them, clear as a bell strike. Sirius's face went through something complicated, not guilt, exactly, but the adjacent thing, the thing that lives next to guilt in people who didn't do something wrong but suspect they should have noticed. "No," Sirius said. "I swear to you, Harry. I didn't know. I knew Dumbledore had plans for you, I knew he was managing the situation. I didn't know the specifics. I didn't know about," his jaw tightened. "I didn't know he was inside your head." 14 months old, Harry said. "Some of them date to my 14th month." A long silence. Sirius had gone very still in the mirror. He told me about the charm he placed on the house in Godric's Hollow, he said, carefully. The general protection work. He told me you were being protected. Protected, Harry repeated. I know, Sirius said. His voice had gone to something quiet and extremely controlled, which was, Harry understood now with complete clarity, how Sirius Black sounded when he was genuinely furious. The loud angry version of Sirius was frustration. The quiet version was the real thing. I know. When I get about that, Harry said. I'm filing charges with the Ministry tomorrow. For what was done to me. The legal process is going to require a full audit of every decision Dumbledore made regarding my welfare, starting from before my parents died. He paused. When they do that audit, your trial comes up. Your lack of trial, specifically. Sirius stared at him. I'm going to make sure it comes up loudly, Harry said. Harry. Sirius's voice had a different quality now. Something that wasn't quite hope and was more solid than hope. You don't have to, I know I don't have to, Harry said, and heard his own echo of what Ron had said that morning, and felt the rightness of it. I want to. There's a difference. I'm starting to understand the difference. Sirius looked at him through the mirror for a long moment, and then, not laughing, not performing the bark-loud humor Harry knew from their previous conversations, he smiled. It was small and fierce and completely genuine. Your father would have loved this version of you, Sirius said. He would have been absolutely insufferable about it. Tell me about him, Harry said. Not the version I was given. The real one. What was James Potter actually like? It was 2 a.m. before Harry put the mirror down. He lay back on the hospital bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, full of James Potter. Not the cardboard hero he'd been handed, the perfect sacrifice, the tragic victim, the real person, the irritating and brilliant and deeply flawed and genuinely brave person who had existed before he became a symbol. The boy who'd been arrogant at 15 and ashamed of it at 17. The man who'd made Sirius godfather because he'd said, if I go, someone has to teach him to be properly irresponsible. The parent who'd written in a letter, 3 days before he died, that Harry had already started doing magic in his cot and it was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever seen. Harry looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he slept, and the dreams were different. They were his. He was aware of that even inside them, a new awareness, a background register of self that the charms had apparently been suppressing along with everything else. He dreamed about the cupboard under the stairs, which he'd dreamed about 100 times, but this time instead of the familiar dull acceptance of it, he felt what he'd apparently always actually felt about it but had been made not to act on. The cold, clear, justifiable fury of a child who knew this was wrong and had been shaped not to say so. He woke up at 6 with that feeling intact, which was both exhausting and necessary. Ron was sitting in the chair beside his bed. This was unexpected enough that Harry sat up sharply, and Ron, who had apparently also fallen asleep in the chair and was currently wearing the expression of a person whose neck was making complaints, jerked awake and said, Hermione said Uranus, which was apparently what he'd been dreaming about. What are you doing here? Harry asked. Sleeping in a chair, apparently, Ron said, working his neck carefully from side to side. I wasn't, Pomfrey let me in around midnight. I wasn't going to leave you up here on your own. He looked at Harry with the blunt directness that was so fundamentally Ron that it had survived years of whatever enchantments had been floating around them. How are you? Different, Harry said. Better, I think. It's hard to baseline it. Ron nodded slowly. I've been thinking about it all night. The charm thing. He hesitated, and Harry could see him being careful, picking his way through something. There's a thing I need to say and it might come out wrong. Say it. I'm glad, Ron said. I'm glad that whatever version of me has been your mate all this time, I'm glad that was just me. Nobody put that there. I chose that. He met Harry's eyes. I needed you to know that. Harry looked at him for a moment. The sharp, warm clarity of it, Ron Weasley had sat in a chair all night to make sure that was said first thing. No one had made him do it. Not one compulsion, not one enchantment. Just Ron. I know, Harry said. Madam Finch checked. None of my interpersonal relationships outside of the Dumbledore-specific bindings were compelled. The charms targeted my internal responses, not other people. He paused. You're real, Ron. Ron breathed out. Right. Good. He straightened in the chair. So what are we doing today? I need to see Madam Finch's complete report. I need to speak to McGonagall before she disappears into whatever guilt spiral she's currently occupying. I need to write a formal request to the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement for the file on my parents' will and estate. He reached for Hermione's notes on the bedside table. And I need breakfast. I'm absolutely starving. Ron's face broke into a grin. Now that, he said, sounds like something I can help with. Hermione arrived at 7 carrying a tray from the kitchens, 2 additional rolls of parchment, and the expression of someone who had slept approximately 3 hours and used the remaining time extremely productively. She set the tray down, pushed the parchment into Harry's hands, and sat on the foot of the bed with her hands in her lap and looked at him with the kind of directness that meant she had something to say and had been rehearsing how to say it since approximately 4 in the morning. Some of what I thought was genuine concern for your well-being, she said, without preamble, may have been artificially reinforced. Harry frowned. What do you mean? Charm 43, she said, and there was something in her voice that was very controlled and very angry and very deeply personal. I looked it up in Madam Finch's preliminary report, which she filed with the hospital wing overnight. Charm 43 is described as a sympathetic resonance construct. It creates strong protective responses in people in the subject's immediate social circle. Not by charming them directly, it works through the subject's own magical signature, amplifying the natural protective instincts of people nearby. Harry went still. So people around me were affected. Not controlled, Hermione said precisely. The instinct was always there, it says specifically it only amplified what existed naturally. But some of the urgency I felt. Some of the absolute certainty that you always needed protecting. That might not have been entirely, she stopped. Hermione, Harry said. I hate this, she said, and it came out raw and genuine. I hate not knowing which parts were mine. The part where you wrote 23 pages of notes in the middle of a catastrophic revelation because you wanted me to have the information, Harry said. That was yours. Nobody in the world charmed you into doing that. That is simply you. She looked at him for a moment, and something in her face shifted, and she pressed her lips together and nodded, once, briskly, and picked up her own copy of the notes. Right, she said. The legal angle. The legal angle, Harry agreed. Wizarding Britain has very specific laws about magical interference with a minor. The Magical Persons Protection Act of 1947, passed after several documented cases of coercive binding in the aftermath of Grindelwald's War, explicitly prohibits the casting of compulsion enchantments on any person under the age of 17 without documented medical necessity and guardian consent. It carries a maximum sentence of 15 years in Azkaban per charm. She paused. Per charm, Harry. The number sat there. 127, Ron said, from the chair. Per charm, Hermione repeated. The statute of limitations doesn't begin until the subject is made aware of the enchantments, which means the clock started yesterday morning, Harry said. Exactly. He ate his breakfast and thought about this. Toast and eggs and tea, which tasted better than anything had tasted in recent memory, possibly because he was eating it as himself. He thought about 15 years per charm. He thought about Dumbledore in that plain wooden chair with his hands shaking. He thought about what justice actually meant when the person who'd done the damage had genuinely, completely believed they were preventing a worse one. He thought about it, and he did not soften it, because the new internal voice, his actual internal voice, the one that had always been there under the management, was not inclined toward softening things that didn't deserve to be softened. "I'm not going for maximum sentencing," he said. "I'm going for the audit. I want everything Dumbledore decided on my behalf on record. I want my parents' will. I want the truth about why I was placed with the Dursleys. I want Sirius's case reopened." He poured more tea. "The charms themselves, I'll decide what to do about those once I have the full picture." "That's very measured of you," Hermione said carefully. "It's very strategic," Harry said. "There's a difference." She stared at him for half a second, and then, very slowly, smiled. "You're frightening when you're like this, you know." "I'm just being myself," Harry said. "Apparently that's frightening. That probably tells us something." McGonagall came at 9. She knocked on the hospital wing door with 3 sharp, precise knocks, which was a thing she had never done before in Harry's memory. She usually arrived in classrooms and corridors with the casual authority of someone who owned all the space she occupied. Knocking was an acknowledgement that she might not be welcome, and Minerva McGonagall acknowledging that she might not be welcome was, in itself, more extraordinary than anything that had happened yesterday. Pomfrey let her in. She walked to the end of the ward and stopped 6 feet from Harry's bed, and stood there in her green robes and her tartan, very straight, very still, and looked at him. Harry looked back. "I owe you an apology," McGonagall said. "Before anything else is said. I owe you a significant and probably insufficient apology." "Did you know?" Harry asked. Same question he'd asked Sirius. Different quality of answer expected. McGonagall's jaw tightened. "Not the scope of it," she said. "I knew that Albus had made certain decisions regarding your upbringing. Regarding the conditions under which you'd be raised and the manner in which your introduction to the wizarding world would be managed. I had misgivings. I expressed those misgivings." She paused. "Once. And then I deferred to his judgment, as I had on most significant matters for the preceding 40 years, because Albus Dumbledore had been right so many times that the occasions when he was wrong had become functionally inconceivable to me." "You saw where he placed me," Harry said. "You spent a day watching the Dursleys before he put me on their doorstep." "I know that. It's in Hagrid's account of the night." Something moved across McGonagall's face that was, simply and entirely, pain. "Yes," she said. "And you left me there anyway." "Yes," she said again. "I did." Harry looked at her for a moment. He thought about fifth-year McGonagall in all the versions he'd previously experienced, stern, fair, occasionally warm in the brisk and unsentimental way of people who express care through competence. He thought about what it meant to be protected by someone who had watched him be placed in harm's way and chosen deference over instinct. "I need something from you," he said. She straightened slightly. "Name it." "I need someone inside Hogwarts who isn't going to disappear into the Ministry's investigation process. I need someone who knows where all the bodies are buried administratively, every decision Dumbledore made about this school and about me specifically. And I need someone who, if I ask a direct question, will give me a direct answer." McGonagall looked at him steadily. "I can do that. And I need you to be honest when you don't know something," Harry said. "I've had enough of people being carefully truthful." "I understand the distinction," she said, "and I accept it." She paused. "There are things you should know about your parents' will. It was sealed by Dumbledore's authority as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot in November 1981. I was not party to the decision, but I knew it had been done." Another pause. "It named Sirius Black as your primary guardian. It explicitly stated that you were not to be placed with Petunia Dursley under any circumstances." The hospital wing was very quiet. Harry was aware of Ron beside him going very still, of Hermione's quill stopping against parchment. "Not under any circumstances," Harry said. Those were the precise words. McGonagall held his gaze without flinching. Lily was extremely specific. Harry nodded slowly. "He filed this." He filed it in the place where he was keeping all the information that had come in since yesterday morning, not to explode with, not to fall apart over, but to use. To be precise with. He could feel the shape of it all starting to form, the architecture of what had been done and what could be done in response, and it was, despite everything, interesting in the way that complex problems are interesting when you have the full capacity to think about them. "Thank you," he said. "For telling me." McGonagall nodded. She turned to go, and then stopped. "For what it's worth," she said, and her voice was quieter now, stripped of the formal register, just a woman speaking honestly to a boy she had failed. "You were always the most talented student I have taught in 32 years at this school. The things you did with magic even through everything that was suppressing you," she stopped herself. "I just thought you should hear it said plainly, without qualifications." She left before he could respond to that. The door to the hospital wing opened again at 10, and this time it was not a welcome arrival. Umbridge entered with two ministry officials Harry didn't recognize and the specific velocity of someone who had been awake since the moment the story broke and had spent every hour since converting the situation into personal advantage. She was wearing a fresh pink cardigan. She always wore a fresh pink cardigan. Harry sometimes thought she might sleep in it. "Mr. Potter," she said, with warm professional concern that fit her face like a costume. "I hope you're recovering well. I wanted to ensure you knew that the ministry is taking your situation with the utmost. What do you want?" Harry said. The warmth didn't falter. "A brief statement. For the record. Your account of the events in the Great Hall yesterday, and your current understanding of what occurred. It will help us build the strongest possible case." "Against Dumbledore," Harry said. "Against those responsible for what was done to you," Umbridge said, with the smooth precision of someone who had chosen their words before entering the room. Harry looked at her. He looked at her the way he now looked at everything, with the full, clear, unmanaged attention of a person who isn't filtering their perceptions through someone else's agenda. He saw the ambition. He saw the strategy. He saw the genuine outrage that she felt, which was real, just not primarily on his behalf. She was outraged on behalf of the narrative, on behalf of the political opportunity, on behalf of the version of this story in which Dolores Umbridge was the defender of the wronged. "Madam Umbridge," he said pleasantly, "I'm going to be pursuing my own legal representation. Any official statement I make will be made to the full Wisengamot in session, with my solicitor present, not in a hospital bed to a ministry official at 10 in the morning." He smiled. It was his first real smile in a while and it was not reassuring. "But thank you for stopping by." She held the pleasant expression for a creditable 2 seconds before it did something complicated at the edges. "You'll find the ministry's cooperation very valuable in a case of this complexity," she said. "I'm sure I will," Harry said. "I'll be in touch. Through my solicitor." "You don't have a solicitor." "I will by this afternoon." "A beat." "You're 15 years old," she said, and the pleasantness had thinned to something more honest. "I'm the victim of 127 crimes," Harry said, "which means I have legal standing that supersedes age restrictions on representation in wizarding law. Section 12, Magical Persons Protection Act, 1947. Hermione has the exact wording if you'd like to check." Hermione, without looking up from her parchment, turned to a specific page and held it up. Umbridge looked at it. She looked at Harry. She reassembled her expression into something serviceable. "We'll be in touch," she said. "Through my solicitor," Harry said. She left, and the door had barely closed before Ron let out a long, carefully restrained sound that resolved into a slightly hysterical laugh. "Where did that come from?" You don't usually, I know," Harry said. He flexed his fingers. The magic was still doing that thing, the quiet, available, fully present thing. It hadn't stopped since the final charms were removed. It was like having a room in your house that you'd always known existed but had never been able to open, and the door was open now, and the room was large. "I'm working out what I actually think about things. It's fast." "It's brilliant," Ron said. Don't make me self-conscious about it, Harry said. The healers from St. Mungo's returned at 11, Madam Finch and her trainee colleague, whose name Harry now knew was Marcus Elwood and who seemed to be working through a personal crisis about everything he'd witnessed yesterday with the contained urgency of a man writing his thesis statement in real time. We have the full report, Madam Finch said, settling into the chair Ron vacated for her with the crisp efficiency of a woman who had been doing paperwork since dawn. It's detailed and it's not pleasant reading. Before I go through it, I want to assess how you're experiencing the post-removal period. Any disorientation? Sensory changes? Emotional instability? Some disorientation, Harry said. Like having a new prescription in your glasses. Everything's the right shape, it's just sharper, Madam Finch said. Yes. That's expected. Your perceptual filters have changed. Significantly. She made a note. Sensory changes. I can feel the castle, Harry said. The magic in the walls. I can feel it all the time. Is that? Madam Finch and Elwood exchanged a look that was professionally managed but contained a significant volume of information. That's consistent with the post-suppression profile we expected, she said carefully. One of the longer-standing compulsion constructs was doing double duty. It was both controlling your instinctive responses and suppressing your ambient magical awareness. Without that suppression, she paused. What's your assessment of your own magical capacity right now, Mr. Potter? Comparatively speaking. Harry thought about how to describe it honestly. It's like comparing the light in here to the light outside, he said finally. Same light. Just unconstrained. Madam Finch wrote something down. Elwood muttered something that might have been Merlin very quietly. The report, Harry said. She went through it. She went through all of it, methodically, in the precise language of medical documentation, each of the 127 charms catalogued by type, approximate age, magical signature, and function. She went through the emotional suppression work that had been reshaping his internal landscape since infancy. She went through the memory modifications, not erasure, but subtle alteration, the tweaking of emotional valence, the change of context that transformed, this is wrong and I should object, into, this is how things are. She went through the Dumbledore-specific loyalty binding and its subsidiary constructs with the careful tone of a person delivering information they know is going to be used in court. She went through Charm 31, the suppression of his natural occlumency ability, and Harry sat very still when she read that one, because he knew what it meant. Occlumency was the defense of the mind. He had a natural talent for it. It had been suppressed, deliberately, which meant his mind had been left open to the Voldemort connection that had been hurting him for 4 years, that had given him nightmares, that had given him Cedric's death in real time, and the suppression of that defense had not been an accident. It had been a choice. He needed the connection open, Harry said quietly. Not a question. He was working it out in real time. Dumbledore needed me to be able to see into Voldemort's mind. He suppressed my natural defenses so the connection would work. Madam Finch said nothing, which was its own answer. Harry looked at the wall for a moment. He looked at the grey stone of the hospital wing and thought about the plan, the greater good, the war, the sacrificial lamb who needed to stay in exactly the right conditions to be useful at exactly the right moment. He thought about Dumbledore in that wooden chair with his hands trembling, and he thought about how much was calculation and how much was genuine care, and how completely those two things had been allowed to coexist in one person's mind. What's Dumbledore's current magical status? He asked. Another exchanged look between the healers. As of this morning, Madam Finch said, the destabilization is ongoing. The charm collapse triggered a cascading feedback. Each construct that falls takes back the anchoring magic from his core, but the integration was so deep and so old that the retrieval process is destructive rather than restorative. He's not getting the magic back cleanly. She paused. He has approximately 30 to 40% of his previous capacity. We expect that to stabilize, but, Harry prompted. The oldest constructs, the ones from your earliest childhood, those were the most deeply embedded. When they finish collapsing, we're not certain what the final baseline will be. She met his eyes. He was the most powerful wizard alive. He will not be that again. Harry absorbed this. He thought about what it meant to take something from someone who had taken so much from him. He waited to feel satisfaction, because he thought he should, and what he found instead was something more complicated and less comfortable. Dumbledore had made him a victim. Dumbledore's own magic had made them, in some horrible, intimate way, connected. Harry's captivity and Dumbledore's power had been the same system. And now both were undone, simultaneously, and Harry didn't know what to do with the fact that he felt, beneath the anger and the clarity and the cold strategic thinking, something that was almost grief. Not for the charms. Never for those. For what it meant that this man, this brilliant, complicated, well-intentioned man, had looked at a baby and decided that the best possible future for that child involved removing his autonomy completely. Had decided that the world was so dangerous, the stakes so impossibly high, that a single human being's right to be themselves was an acceptable cost. Harry was 15 and had no interest in being a saint about it. But he was also, for the first time in his life, genuinely himself, and the person he turned out to actually be when no one was managing him was someone who could hold more than one thing at once. He was furious. He was also sad. He also intended to set fire, metaphorically and possibly legally, to every decision Dumbledore had made on his behalf without his knowledge. These things coexisted without difficulty. At 2 in the afternoon, with Ron and Hermione still present and Madame Finch's report memorized, Harry got out of bed, got dressed in the spare clothes Ron had fetched from the dormitory, and walked to the door of the hospital wing. "You're supposed to rest," Pomfrey called from her office. "I'll rest tomorrow," Harry said. "Mr. Potter, I'll eat something first," Harry said, as a concession, and left. The castle felt different under his feet. That wasn't imagination, he could feel it, the way you can feel the difference between carpet and wood through the soles of your shoes. Hogwarts was alive in a way that most people never fully registered, but Harry registered it now with complete clarity, every flagstone warm with stored magic, every arch overhead humming faintly with 400 years of accumulated spellwork. The castle knew him. It had always known him. He could feel it in the way a door opened half a second before he reached it, in the way the staircases held position when he was on them, in the warmth that radiated from the walls at the precise spots where he felt most uncertain. He had been a natural at everything in this place, even suppressed. He was curious what natural meant now. He ran into Neville Longbottom on the 4th floor corridor. Neville was carrying a tray of something from the greenhouses, seed pods, by the look of it, and stopped when he saw Harry with an expression that was equal parts relief and anxiety, which was fairly standard Neville and was, Harry was beginning to understand, an expression that had been doing a lot of heavy lifting for years. "Harry," Neville said. How are you?" I wanted to come yesterday but Professor Sprout said, "I'm all right," Harry said, which was more true than he'd expected when he said it. "How are you?" Neville blinked. People did that when Harry asked the question with genuine attention instead of social reflex. There was apparently a perceptible difference. "I'm fine. I'm worried about you." "That's kind of you," Harry said, and meant it. "Can I ask you something?" This might sound strange. "Everything sounds strange at the moment," Neville said honestly. "Fair. Did you ever feel, in the time we've been friends, did you ever feel like you were being managed? Like your instincts were leading you somewhere they'd been pointed?" Neville thought about this seriously, which Harry appreciated. "No," he said finally. "I feel like my instincts have always been mostly pointing me toward plants and away from confrontation, and that's just me." He paused. "I'm sorry about what happened to you. What was done to you?" His voice was direct and sincere, uncluttered by the social awkwardness that usually complicated his emotional expression. "It was wrong. Whoever did it, it was wrong." "Yes," Harry said simply. "It was." They parted ways, and Harry continued down the corridor, and Ron and Hermione fell in on either side of him the way they had always fallen in, natural and easy and entirely their own, and the three of them walked through the castle that felt like home, actually felt like home now, not like a controlled environment that had been made to feel safe, and Harry thought about what came next. What came next was the visit to Dumbledore's office. He hadn't planned it. He realized, walking up the 7th-floor corridor, that he simply wanted to have this conversation while Dumbledore had no tools to deflect it, no full magical arsenal, no ability to charm or obliviate or redirect, no comfortable power to fall back on. He wanted to have it now, while everything was stripped back to just two people, and one of them had something important to say. The gargoyle was still at its post. Harry looked at it. "I don't know the password," he said. "But I'm going up." The gargoyle considered this for one full second and then stepped aside. He heard Hermione make a small sound of surprise behind him and kept walking. The stairs spiraled up and the door at the top was closed, and Harry knocked once, waited 2 seconds, and opened it. The office was familiar in its bones and foreign in its atmosphere. All the usual complexity of it, the portraits, the silver instruments, the pensieve on its stand, but the ambient power that had always made this room feel like the center of something, the eye of an authoritative weather system, was subdued. There was magic here still, plenty of it, accumulated in the objects and the walls and the portraits, but the primary source of it was seated behind the desk in his magnificent chair and was, by any honest assessment, diminished. Dumbledore looked up when Harry entered. He was in the same robes as yesterday, which meant he hadn't left this room. His eyes were the same, still the sharpest thing in his face, still carrying all that accumulated intelligence and ancient complication. But the warmth that Harry had always associated with him, the reassuring gravitational quality, Harry noticed its absence the way you notice a familiar smell that's no longer there. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was steady. "I expected you would come." "I expect you expected quite a lot of things," Harry said. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the office with his hands loose at his sides and looked at this man who had built him. "I've had the full report. I know what each of the charms did." Dumbledore nodded once. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "I want an honest answer, and I want you to know that I'll be able to tell if it isn't honest, because whatever you were doing to my perceptions before isn't doing it anymore." "I know," Dumbledore said quietly. "Why a loyalty charm for the Order of the Phoenix?" "Pre-membership, before you'd even asked me." "Why that specific one?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed to be sure," he said, "that when the time came, and the time would come, I had seen that much, you would choose to fight. That you would choose to stand with the right side rather than seek safety or removal. You didn't think I'd make that choice on my own." "I thought you might," Dumbledore said, and his voice was careful and precise and entirely honest in a way that was new and deeply uncomfortable. "But thought and certainty are different things. And the certainty felt necessary. You made the decision for me," Harry said. "In advance. To protect the war effort." "Yes. And the charm on my occlumency ability," Harry said. "The one that left my mind open to Voldemort's connection." A longer pause. "Yes. Because you needed the connection." "Because I needed to know what he knew," Dumbledore said. "And later, because there were things I needed you to learn through that connection. Things that would prepare you." "Things," Harry said. He took a breath. "You left my mind open to a dark wizard's influence for 4 years, and every nightmare I had, every vision of pain and death, every time his emotions bled through into mine, that was your choice. That was something you did deliberately." "Yes," Dumbledore said. The word fell between them like a stone into water. "I think," Harry said, after a long moment, "that you genuinely believed all of it was necessary. I think you looked at the whole board and did the maths and decided that the cost was acceptable because the alternative was worse. I think you've been doing that for so long that you stopped noticing the people on the board were people." Dumbledore said nothing. "I'm going to file charges," Harry said. "I'm going to open the legal case. I'm going to get my parents' will unsealed and Sirius freed and every decision you made on my behalf put on the public record. I'm doing that regardless of what you say or what you offer or what the implications are for the war effort. I know, Dumbledore said. And here is what else I'm going to do, Harry said, and something in his voice shifted, not louder, not harder, just more present, more full of the thing that had been unclenching since yesterday. I'm going to fight Voldemort. Because I've looked at myself clearly for the first time and I've found out that I actually want to. Not because I was charmed to. Not because I was positioned to. Because he killed my parents, he's been trying to kill me since I was a baby, and he has to be stopped. He paused. But I'm going to do it on my terms. My strategy. My choices. And the war effort can adjust to me, rather than the other way around. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, long moment. The portraits on the walls were all watching, the painted headmasters and headmistresses of Hogwarts past, quiet and attentive in their frames. You're very like your mother, Dumbledore said finally. She had the same quality of complete moral clarity. It was, in its own way, terrifying. Good, Harry said. He turned and walked toward the door. Harry. Dumbledore's voice stopped him. Not through any charm or compulsion, just the voice of an old man with something important left to say. I know it doesn't alter anything. But I did love you. I want you to know that what I did and the love I had existed in the same person at the same time, and I have never been able to make those two things coherent to myself. Harry stood at the door for a moment with his hand on the frame. I know, he said. That's almost the worst part. He left, and behind him, in the quiet of the office, Dumbledore sat alone with the portraits and the pensive and the steadily dimming light of a power that had spent itself on a war it had almost entirely controlled, and was now simply an old man wondering if the things he built would survive the builder. Harry went down the stairs and found Ron and Hermione waiting in the corridor, and the three of them walked away together in the direction of the Great Hall, where dinner was being laid and the students of Hogwarts were adjusting, loudly and with enormous energy, to a world in which Albus Dumbledore was no longer the most powerful person in the building. Harry was hungry again, which felt, in some fundamental way, like a sign of good health. Solicitor first thing tomorrow, Hermione said, with the tone of someone confirming a schedule. Solicitor first thing tomorrow, Harry agreed. I know a good one, she added. My parents' firm uses a magical solicitor for estate matters. She's supposed to be terrifying. Terrifying is exactly what I want, Harry said. Ron held the great hall door open with the small grin of a person who had been waiting for this version of his best friend for 5 years without knowing he was waiting. After you, he said. Harry walked in. Chapter 3, What he remembers. The Ministry of Magic's atrium smelled like floor wax and bureaucratic anxiety, which was, Harry had decided in the 30 seconds since he'd stepped out of the flue, a very honest smell for a building like this. He was wearing plain dark clothes and carrying a leather satchel that Hermione had produced from somewhere and filled with documents before 7 in the morning. His hair was still doing what it always did. He had not attempted to hide it, or himself, or the fact that he was 15 years old and walking into the Ministry of Magic without an appointment, an escort, or anyone's permission. The golden statues in the Fountain of Magical Brethren caught the light in their usual way. Harry glanced at them as he passed, the witch and wizard standing tall, the centaur and goblin and house elf clustered reverentially at their feet, and felt, with his new and clear perception, a distinct and unambiguous distaste for the arrangement that he was fairly certain had always been warranted and had previously been managed out of his conscious experience. You could have come to us, said a voice from his left. He turned. Standing near the security desk was a witch he hadn't met before, mid-40s, compact and economical in her movements, with sharp dark eyes and a kind of face that gave away nothing it hadn't decided to give away. She was wearing robes the color of dark slate and carrying a slim briefcase with the focused comfort of someone who considered it a weapon. You're the solicitor, Harry said. Iris Blackthorne, she said, extending her hand. Her grip was precise and brief. Your friend Miss Granger sent an owl at 5 this morning. I've reviewed the preliminary medical report and Madam Finch's documentation. She looked at him steadily. You understand that what you're walking into today is not a routine filing. I understand, Harry said. Good. Because the ministry will attempt to control this narrative the moment you set foot in the building, and I would prefer that the narrative belongs to my client. She held out her hand for the satchel. Walk exactly beside me. Don't speak unless I indicate. If anyone from the minister's office attempts to redirect us, keep walking. Harry handed her the satchel. I'm not going to be quiet the whole time, he said pleasantly. Just so you know. Iris Blackthorne looked at him for 2 seconds. Hermione also warned me about this, she said, and moved toward the lifts. The magical law enforcement office was on level 2, and the witch behind the desk in the outer reception area recognized Harry before the lift doors were fully open. Her professional composure was good, she managed to pick her quill back up within 3 seconds, but the pause itself was informative. I need to file formal charges under the Magical Persons Protection Act, 1947, Harry said, before she could offer a greeting. I also need to file a request for the unsealing of a restricted document, specifically, the last will and testament of James Charles Potter and Lily Jane Potter, sealed by Albus Dumbledore in November 1981. And I need to initiate a formal review of the case of Sirius Orion Black, who was remanded to Azkaban in 1981 without trial. The witch stared at him. Iris set the briefcase on the desk. Blackthorne and Associates, representing Mr. Harry James Potter. We have documentation for each petition. I'd like to speak with the head of magical law enforcement directly, please. Madam Bones isn't, she doesn't generally. Tell her Harry Potter is here to file charges against Albus Dumbledore, Iris said, with the calm of someone who knows that sentence will move the relevant people at a speed that normal sentences don't achieve. She'll see us. She was right. They were shown to Amelia Bones's office inside 4 minutes. Amelia Bones was a broad-shouldered witch with a monocle and a desk that was covered in so much organized parchment work that it looked almost architectural. She was already standing when they entered, which meant she'd come to some kind of conclusion during those 4 minutes and had decided to meet it on her feet. Mr. Potter, she said. Sit down, please. Thank you, Harry said, and sat. Iris sat beside him and opened the briefcase with a soft click. Bones looked at Harry with the direct, assessing attention of someone who dealt with evidence for a living. Not the famous boy who lived assessment, just a straightforward professional reading of the person in front of her. Harry appreciated it enormously. I've read Madam Finch's report, Bones said. The ministry received it yesterday evening. I've been expecting this visit. Then we can skip the explanatory part, Harry said. We can, Bones agreed. Though I want to say, before we proceed, that what was done to you was illegal under 3 separate statutes and the investigation my department opens today will be thorough and independent of political interference. That is my commitment to you as head of the DMLE, regardless of who is implicated. Harry looked at her. Regardless of Dumbledore's position in the Wizengamot. He is currently under magical suspension pending the outcome of the health investigation, Bones said. The ministry issued that order this morning. His vote is suspended. His authority as Chief Warlock is suspended. Until the investigation is complete, he holds no official position in magical governance. Harry absorbed this. He'd known it was likely, Umbridge had started the wheels turning in the Great Hall, but hearing it stated plainly was different. Dumbledore, the man who had defined Wizarding Britain's institutional structure for 60 years, was suspended. The world was reorganizing itself with remarkable speed around an absence. The will, Harry said. Bones opened a drawer. I had a copy pulled last night when I read the report, she said. I want to be clear, I am sharing this with you in your capacity as primary named beneficiary. This document was sealed illegally. A chief warlock cannot seal a private will without the consent of the named executor and a hearing before the full Wizengamot. Neither of those occurred in November 1981. She slid a folded document across the desk. This seal has already been lifted by my office. Harry picked up the will. It was on heavy cream parchment, the writing in 2 distinct hands, his father's, which was large and slightly slanted, and his mother's, which was smaller and more precise. He recognized them from photographs. He'd never seen their handwriting before. He hadn't known that was something he was missing until this moment, when the sight of it opened a small sharp feeling in his chest that wasn't grief exactly but was its close neighbor. He read it. Iris read it beside him, making small notations in a leather notebook. His parents had been, it turned out, extraordinarily thorough. The will covered the Potter family estate, the house in Godric's Hollow, the vault at Gringotts, the properties in Derbyshire and Cornwall, the investments that had been accumulating without Harry's knowledge since 1981. It covered guardianship with the clarity of people who had anticipated the worst and refused to leave anything ambiguous. Sirius Black, primary guardian. If unable to serve, Frank and Alice Longbottom, joint guardians. If unable to serve, Remus Lupin. Petunia Desley was not mentioned. Not as a consideration, not as a fallback, not as a footnote. There was, in fact, a single line that addressed the Desley family directly, in Lily Potter's precise hand: "Harry is not to be placed with my sister Petunia, with whom I am not reconciled and with whom I do not wish my son to have any relationship imposed upon him. She has made her feelings about our world clear. He deserves better." Harry read this line 3 times. He set the parchment down on Bones's desk with the careful flatness of someone placing an object that is more fragile than it looks, and he looked at the wall behind Bones's head for a long moment, and breathed. His mother had said it clearly. His mother, who had died protecting him, had been absolutely explicit: "He deserves better," and Albus Dumbledore had read those words and looked at a toddler and made a different decision, and had then spent 14 years making sure the toddler couldn't be angry about it. "I need a moment," Harry said. "Take your time," Bones said. She had the decency to find something on her desk that required her attention. Iris said nothing. She was already writing up the formal petition for Sirius's review. Harry looked at his mother's handwriting. He deserves better. He thought about Lily Potter, who he'd been allowed to know only as a symbol, the sacrifice, the love so powerful it rewrote the rules of dark magic. He thought about her now as a person, a woman who had known she was in danger, who had sat down with parchment and quill and said with complete clarity exactly what she wanted for her son, who had trusted that her words would be honored. She had trusted that. He breathed in. He breathed out. He picked the will back up. "I want certified copies of this document sent to Gringotts, to the Hogwarts Board of Governors, to the Daily Prophet, and to Sirius Black at his current place of residence," Harry said. "I want the Gringotts notification to include a request for a full accounting of the Potter estate since 1981, including any withdrawals made by third parties." Bones made a note. "I can facilitate the Gringotts notification through my office." "Thank you." Harry looked at her steadily. "Sirius Black." Bones set her quill down. "The case is already flagged," she said. "When your situation was reported yesterday, I had my team pull every file connected to Dumbledore's post-1981 decisions. Black's file was the first one I read." Her expression shifted, not soft, exactly, but carrying something that was honest. "He was imprisoned without trial. That is not a disputed fact. There is no trial record because there was no trial. The question before my office is whether to pursue emergency review, which I have the authority to initiate unilaterally, or to put it before the Wisengamot." "Emergency review," Harry said. "The Wisengamot has enough political complication right now. Sirius has been in Grimmauld Place as a fugitive for a year. He should be free before this turns into a hearing that takes 6 months. Emergency review requires that I present evidence of illegal detention to a 3-judge panel within 72 hours, Bones said. The absence of a trial record is evidence. The circumstances of his capture, and I've read Peter Pettigrew's alleged death report, which I'm now not at all satisfied with, provide additional grounds." A pause. "Do you know where Pettigrew is currently?" "He's alive," Harry said. "He's been with Voldemort since last year. I saw him in person. He has a silver hand and he's the one who restored Voldemort's body in June. I'll give a formal statement on that today if you want it. Bones's professional composure held up admirably under the weight of this information, but only just. Yes, she said. I would like that statement today. The statement took 2 hours. Harry gave it clearly, without embellishment, without the careful diplomatic softening that he now recognized had always been a compulsion-influenced instinct, the tendency to understate, to avoid seeming dramatic, to make the situation easier for the person receiving it. He told Amelia Bones, in the precise and chronological detail of someone describing something they had been present for and are not afraid of having on record, exactly what had happened in the graveyard. Iris sat beside him and took her own notes and interjected twice to clarify legal specifics. When it was done, Bones sat back in her chair and removed her monocle and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I've had 6 Aurors telling me for 14 months that you know who was not back, she said. I've been overruled by the minister at every turn. Minister Fudge has been prioritizing political comfort over factual evidence, Harry said. That's a problem, but it's a separate problem. Today I want the charges against Dumbledore filed and Sirius's case opened. Fudge is next week's problem. The corner of Bones's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Something with a similar structural function. You are very different from what I expected, she said. I'm what I was always going to be, Harry said, without the interference. He filed the charges before lunch. 127 counts of unlawful compulsion magic on a minor, filed under the Magical Persons Protection Act. 1 count of illegal suppression of defensive magical development. 1 count of deliberate facilitation of magical mind exposure. The paperwork was extensive and Iris handled most of it with the efficiency of someone who had prepared all of it before arriving that morning, which she had. He was back through the Fleur to Hogwarts by 2 o'clock, which gave him the afternoon. He spent it in the library. Not because Hermione had suggested it, though she had enthusiastically confirmed it was an excellent idea. He went because the clear, expanded intelligence that had replaced his managed thinking found genuine pleasure in research now that it wasn't filtered through an instilled tendency toward minimum necessary effort in academic contexts. Charm 19, the notes had said. Suppression of independent intellectual curiosity. He had, apparently, always been this interested in learning things. He just hadn't been allowed to act on it. He spent 3 hours reading about Horcruxes. This was not entirely a surprise to him. The Horcrux question had been nagging at him since the graveyard, since the moment he'd looked at Voldemort's reconstructed body and understood at a gut level that this was not someone operating at standard mortality. The word had surfaced in his mind during the charm removal, one of the residual knowledge moments when a suppressed thought finally had room to exist. He'd found it in the restricted section before Madame Pants could process the fact that he hadn't got a permission slip, because Hogwarts kept opening things for him now with the casual helpfulness of a building that had been waiting for him to actually ask. What he found in the books was disturbing in the specific and technical way that deeply illegal dark magic tends to be disturbing, clinical, horrible, and entirely coherent in its internal logic. Splitting the soul through murder. Housing the fragment in an object. The theory of it was old, pre-ministry, pre-statute, from the time when dark wizarding philosophy was an academic discipline with a literature. He took notes. He thought about the diary from second year, the diary that had housed a piece of Voldemort's memory, or possibly something more than memory, and he thought about the fact that Dumbledore had known about this and had not shared it and had suppressed his ability to think about it independently. He thought about what he'd felt in the graveyard. Voldemort's terror when their wands connected. Not confidence. Terror. The specific fear of a man who has invested his immortality in objects that can be destroyed. Harry wrote, number of Horcruxes unknown. Diary confirmed destroyed. How many others? Where? He wrote, Dumbledore knows more. Get it from him now, while he can't manage the conversation. He wrote, Voldemort's body is new. He's been rebuilding for a year. He is not at full strength yet. This is a window. He underlined this as a window twice. You've been in here for 3 hours, Ron said, appearing from behind a bookshelf with the expression of someone who had been looking for him since approximately 4 o'clock. Hermione said to leave you alone and I did for 2.5 hours, which I think demonstrates significant personal growth. It does, Harry agreed. Sit down. I need to think out loud. Ron sat. He pulled a book off the nearest shelf, opened it to a random page, and held it in front of him with the air of someone providing cover for a conversation. Go ahead. Voldemort split his soul, Harry said, quietly. Multiple times. It's why he can't be killed normally. There are objects out there, could be anywhere, each one housing a fragment of him. They all have to be destroyed before he can die permanently. Ron looked at him over the top of the book. How many objects? Don't know. Probably more than 2. There's a theoretical discussion in one of these. He tapped the open book in front of him, that suggests each split makes the remaining soul less stable, more fractured, so there'd be a practical upper limit. But even 3 or 4 hidden objects, scattered across Britain or further, that's a significant problem. What are they? The diary was one. I destroyed it in 2nd year, Basilisk Fong through it. The books say only extreme magical destruction works. Regular spell work bounces off. He paused. I need to get everything Dumbledore knows. All of it, not the curated version. He was researching this, I can see it in the pensive room, the way those memories were arranged. He stopped. Can you distract the gargoyle for me tomorrow morning? Ron stared at him. Can I distract a stone gargoyle? Yes. How? I have absolutely no idea. That's your problem. Ron thought about this with the focused creativity of a natural chess player presented with an interesting constraint. Give me 10 minutes, he said. What's the gargoyle's weakness? I think it responds to direct magical engagement. Try a summoning charm on something near it and let it process the violation for a few seconds. Ron nodded slowly, like a man accepting a commission. Right. 10 minutes. Don't make me wait. I never make you wait, Harry said. You literally always make me wait. This was sufficiently true that Harry let it go without argument and went back to his notes. That night, lying in his dormitory bed with the curtains drawn and the soft sounds of 4 other boys sleeping around him, Harry had the memory. He hadn't been expecting it. He'd been lying still, thinking about the Horcrux research and the serious situation and the legal process in its various moving pieces, and the memory arrived without announcement, not a dream, not a constructed thing, but a genuine recovered fragment, surfacing now that the suppression was gone the way objects surface in water when the weight holding them down is removed. He was 4 years old. He was in the garden of number 4, Privet Drive, the square, precise garden that Aunt Petunia controlled with the vigilance of someone who considered an unapproved dandelion a personal affront. It was afternoon, summer, and Harry was small and thin and very alone, sitting beside the garden fence where the dandelions actually did grow because it was out of direct sight of the kitchen window. He was looking at a beetle. The beetle was on a leaf, doing whatever beetles do, and Harry at 4 was watching it with the specific deep attention that small children give to things that interest them completely. And then, not intentionally, not with any idea of what he was doing, he had reached out with one small hand and wanted the beetle to be happy, wanted it the way children want things, simply and completely. The beetle glowed. It was brief and soft, a warm amber light, and the beetle spread its wings and flew a perfect circle and landed again on its leaf, and Harry at 4 had laughed, genuinely, delightedly, the full-body laugh of a child who has just discovered that the world is strange and beautiful and responsive. And then Aunt Petunia had appeared at the garden gate and the light had gone out and Harry had made himself small against the fence post, but the thing that had happened was still there inside him, warm and certain. He knew what it was, lying in his Hogwarts dormitory at 15. He was remembering the first time he'd consciously directed magic, the real undirected kind, the kind that was entirely himself, and it had been joy. It had been curiosity and warmth and the genuine desire to make something better. That was what had been in him all along. He lay still for a while with this memory sitting in his chest. Then another one came. He was 6. A teacher at primary school, Mrs. Albright, who had always been kind, which was notable enough at the time to have been memorable, had given him a book on weather systems and he'd read it 3 times in a weekend and come back on Monday with 14 questions that she'd had to look up, and she'd looked up every one and brought the answers back and said, "Harry, you have the kind of mind that's going to go somewhere interesting," and he'd felt. And then the feeling had just stopped. Clean as a switch being thrown. The curiosity, the engagement, the warm certainty that questions were good, just gone. Like a door closing. Charm 19. Suppression of independent intellectual curiosity. First application, subject age 6. He was awake in the dark of the dormitory and he was, quietly and entirely, furious. Not at the charms in the abstract. He'd processed the charms abstractly all day, built strategies around them, used them as legal instruments. This was something different. This was the specific, personal, intimate fury of a person who has just understood in physical terms what was taken from them. The beetle in the garden. The weather book. The teacher who had seen something in him and the charm that had made him unable to hold on to what she saw. 14 years of being smaller than he was. He got up, pulled on his trainers, and went to the common room, which was empty at this hour. The fire burned down to red coals. He sat in the chair nearest to the fire and he thought. The thoughts were clean and fast and entirely his own. He thought about the Horcruxes and about Voldemort's window of vulnerability. He thought about Sirius getting free. He thought about the Ministry and Umbridge and Fudge and the system of institutional bad faith that had allowed all of this to occur. He thought about what he actually wanted, not what he'd been shaped to want, not the designated role he'd been built for, but what Harry Potter, the real one, actually desired. He wanted to win. Not the war as a concept. He wanted, specifically and personally, to dismantle the infrastructure that had made a child's autonomy expendable. He wanted Voldemort stopped not because destiny required it but because Voldemort's worldview was that some people mattered more than others and he had personal and categorical objections. He wanted Sirius at a kitchen table somewhere, laughing. He wanted Ron's chess face across from him on a rainy afternoon. He wanted to know what he was actually capable of, with all of it, without the management. He wanted a lot of things, which was itself new, the simple abundance of wanting, having needs and preferences and ambitions that felt genuinely his. The fire crackled. The portrait of the fat lady snored softly in her frame. Harry pulled out his wand, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, warm in his hand the way it had always been warm, and cast a simple lumos. The light came out the same color it always had, the standard clean white of a basic charm. But it felt different. There was more of it available. More depth behind the simple spell, like hearing a chord where you previously heard a single note. He could feel the full extent of what was powering the lumos the way he hadn't been able to feel before, and the extent of it was, considerably larger than the output required for a simple light charm. He thought, what if I actually tried? He thought about the Patronus, the stag that had been throwing Death Eaters across rooms since his 3rd year, which everyone had found extraordinary for his age. That was the suppressed version. That was a stag built from managed, compressed, directed magic. He raised his wand and thought, expecto patronum. He thought of the beetle in the garden and the light it had made. The stag that erupted from his wand nearly knocked him out of the chair. It was enormous, not the composed, contained Patronus he was used to but something that filled the Gryffindor common room from floor to ceiling, light pouring off it in waves, its antlers brushing the stone of the fireplace around, the whole room lit up like midday through a window. It moved, and the air moved with it, and it turned its great head and looked at Harry with bright silver-white eyes, and Harry looked back and felt, for the first time in his life, that this was simply and exactly what he was. He let it go. The light faded back to firelight. His arm was tingling to the elbow, not from strain but from the same feeling you get when you stretch a muscle properly for the first time, the good ache, the working ache. Bloody hell, said a voice from the stairs. He turned. Neville Longbottom was standing in the entrance to the boys' dormitory in his pajamas, staring at the space where the Patronus had been with an expression of unambiguous awe. "I woke up because the room got bright," Neville said. "I thought the castle was on fire." "Sorry," Harry said. "Don't be," Neville said. He came down the stairs and sat in the chair on the other side of the fire with the composure of someone who had decided to be unafraid of remarkable things. "Can you teach me?" "The Patronus. I've never managed more than a wisp." Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said. "I can. Now. It's 2 in the morning." Neville considered this. "Okay," he said. "But first thing tomorrow?" "First thing tomorrow," Harry agreed. The fire settled lower, and they sat there, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom, both of them changed in their different ways by the upheaval of the past 48 hours, both of them awake in the deep quiet of a castle that was reorganizing itself around a shift in its central power, and talked about magic, and defense, and what Neville could do that he hadn't yet been pushed to find out. Harry found, in those 2 hours before dawn, that Neville Longbottom was considerably more interesting than advertised. Which should probably have been obvious. But things were, he was learning, considerably more interesting than advertised when you saw them without the overlay. He went to Dumbledore's office at 9. The gargoyle stepped aside the moment he reached the corridor, which Ron found anticlimactic. "I practiced the summoning charm," he said, slightly injured. "I had a whole plan." "The castle likes me," Harry said, not unkindly. "Stay down here. I'll be 20 minutes. Dumbledore was in the chair by the window when Harry entered, which was different from his usual position behind the desk. The desk was the power position. Behind the desk, Dumbledore was in control of the space. By the window, in the grey morning light, he was simply an old man. Harry suspected this was deliberate and decided not to note it. "You went to the ministry yesterday," Dumbledore said. "The charges are filed. And the will is unsealed," Harry said. "And Sirius's emergency review convenes tomorrow." Dumbledore received this information with the stillness of someone who already knew most of it. "Good," he said, and if the word cost him something it didn't show in his voice. "I need everything you know about Voldemort's Horcruxes," Harry said. A pause. "Harry, don't," Harry said. Not harshly. Just finally. "Don't start a sentence with my name as a way to reframe the conversation. We're past that. You know what a Horcrux is. You know he made them. I want numbers, known locations, and whatever research you've done." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You've been in the restricted section." "The library has been very cooperative lately," Harry said. "How many?" "My current estimation is 7, Dumbledore said. 1 fragment remaining in him. 6 housed objects. And the diary was 1. So 5 remaining." "Yes. Though I suspect," Dumbledore paused, and something moved across his face that was not his usual careful consideration but something rawer and more reluctant. "I suspect one of the objects may be something you will find particularly, the nature of the night your parents died, and the magic involved in your survival." He stopped again. Harry waited. "I believe," Dumbledore said carefully, "that when Voldemort's killing curse rebounded that night, the piece of soul that was displaced, it may have attached to you. To the scar. I believe there may be a fragment of Voldemort's soul housed inside you, Harry." The fire crackled. A portrait shifted in its frame. The pensieve on its stand caught the light. Harry sat with this for a long moment. "You knew this," he said. "Or suspected it. For how long?" "Since your 2nd year," Dumbledore said. "When you spoke Parseltongue. When the diary responded to you." "My 2nd year." Harry counted backward. 3 years. 3 years of knowing, or suspecting, and of having him come into this office and ask questions and be given the carefully curated version, the managed version, the version that didn't include the possibility that Harry Potter was himself a vessel for the dark wizard he'd been positioned to destroy. Were you going to tell me, Harry said, or was that going to be part of the plan you'd already made? Dumbledore did not answer immediately. The plan where I die, Harry said. That's it, isn't it? That's the endgame you've been building toward. I walk into Voldemort and I die and the soul fragment dies with me and that's how it ends. The silence was its own answer. Harry stood up. He stood in the middle of Dumbledore's office, in the middle of the complicated beautiful mess of it, the portraits and the instruments and the pensieve that held a century's worth of memories, and he looked at the old man by the window, and he was not afraid. He was not broken. He was not the designated sacrifice in someone else's plan. He was very, very angry, and also thinking very fast, because those two things were no longer mutually exclusive. Here's what I know about soul magic, Harry said. Which is more than you think, because I spent yesterday in the library without a compulsion preventing me from finding it interesting. He began to move slowly as he spoke, not pacing, just the movement of thought finding its physical form. Horcruxes are unstable. The soul fragment degrades over time without a proper vessel. The diary fragment was already degraded, it needed a human host to maintain itself. If there's a fragment in my scar, he touched it, briefly, the lightning bolt that had defined his entire life, it has been degraded by 17 years of proximity to a living magical core. My living magical core, which has been, as of 48 hours ago, running at full strength. He paused. Full-strength magical cores are anathema to dark magic constructs, he said. Madame Finch said so in the medical report. She said it in the context of explaining why removing the compulsion charms had been both faster and more destructive than expected, because they were fighting against a magical environment that had become hostile to their nature. He looked at Dumbledore. How hostile would a fully realized magical core be to a degraded soul fragment? Dumbledore had straightened in his chair. Something had arrived in his expression, something that looked, unexpectedly, like hope of the specific kind that comes from watching someone exceed your expectations. Extremely hostile, he said quietly. If the Scar Horcrux has been degraded sufficiently, a deliberate application of, I'm not walking into Voldemort to die, Harry said. I'm going to find a way to remove the fragment without killing myself in the process. And I'm going to start with what's in this pensieve. He crossed to it. He put both hands on the stone basin's rim and looked at the silver-white substance inside. You've been collecting memories of Voldemort's history, he said. His past. The people who knew him before he was Voldemort. That's what these are. Yes, Dumbledore said. I want to see all of them. Harry looked up. Today. Dumbledore rose from his chair by the window, slowly, and came to stand at the pensieve. He stood on the opposite side of the basin and looked at Harry across the shimmering surface. In the morning light, without his full power, he looked entirely human in a way Harry had never seen him look before. All right, he said. He reached into the pensieve and began sorting through the memories with careful hands. There are 11 that are relevant. They tell the story chronologically, from the beginning. From the orphanage. He paused. It helps to know who he was before he was what he became. I know, Harry said. That's why I'm here. They spent 6 hours in the pensieve. Harry moved through 11 memories with his eyes fully open and his mind fully his own, and what he saw was the story of Tom Riddle, brilliant, damaged, terrifying Tom Riddle, who had been born into a world that didn't want him and had decided, with the cold clarity of a prodigy with no moral anchor, that the correct response to a world that doesn't want you was to make the world afraid of you instead. Harry watched a boy in an orphanage learn that magic made people afraid, and decide that fear was better than what came before it. He watched a teenager at Hogwarts charm every adult in his path with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned early that adults were useful or they were obstacles, and that charm worked better than force for the useful ones. He watched Tom Riddle discover Horcruxes in the library, in the same restricted section Harry had been in yesterday, and felt an odd kinship with the moment that he immediately and thoroughly rejected. He watched, in memory after memory, the gradual replacement of Tom Riddle with Voldemort, the slow erasure of whatever had been salvageable in the original, the deliberate construction of something that felt nothing and feared nothing except its own mortality. He came out of the pensive at 4 in the afternoon with his knees slightly unsteady and a great deal to think about. He was always afraid of dying, Harry said. He sat down on the edge of a chair and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes briefly. Everything. All of it. The whole vast, terrible thing was built on one terrified boy who couldn't accept that he was mortal. Yes, Dumbledore said. That is precisely it. And you were going to send me to die for that. I was going to send you knowing that the death wouldn't be permanent, Dumbledore said. The Elder Wand, don't, Harry said. Not angry this time. Just tired. Don't tell me about the plan. I don't want the plan. I want to tell you my plan. He looked up. I'm going to find and destroy all 5 remaining Horcruxes before Voldemort has consolidated his forces. I'm going to do it fast, because this window of his vulnerability won't stay open. And then I'm going to face him as someone who can't be compelled to go softly into a death that someone else designed. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You'll need help. I know, Harry said. That's the other thing about being myself, I can actually ask for it. He stood, and left, and the portraits on the walls watched him go with the focused attention of painted people who understood they had just been in the presence of a turning point. Outside, Ron was waiting on the stairs, eating something that might have been a pasty, working on the expression of a person who had been waiting longer than 10 minutes and felt the record should reflect that. Pasty, he offered. Please, Harry said, and took it, and they walked down through the castle together into the late afternoon light, and Harry felt, with complete, startling, uncomplicated clarity, the particular and profound pleasure of being exactly where you are, as exactly who you are, without apology or management. He intended to stay that way. Chapter 4. The weight of what was done. The Wizengamot chamber smelled like old wood and older arguments, and Harry had been sitting in the public gallery for 11 minutes before anyone noticed he was there. That was fine. He'd arrived early deliberately, because he wanted to watch the chamber fill, wanted to see who sat where, who grouped with whom, which faces tightened when Umbridge walked in, which ones relaxed when Bones took her seat at the senior prosecutor's bench. He was reading the room the way he now read everything, with the full unmanaged attention of someone who had recently discovered that paying attention was one of his better qualities. The emergency review for Sirius Black had convened faster than even Bones had predicted. 48 hours from Harry's visit to her office. The speed of it was itself a message, that the DMLE under Amelia Bones was not going to let this become a slow institutional process that could be quietly managed back into something comfortable. The 3-judge panel was already seated. The absence of a trial record had been formally entered into evidence before Harry arrived. Iris Blackthorne sat at the petitioner's table below looking like someone who had been preparing for this specific moment for the entirety of her legal career and was finding it satisfying. Sirius wasn't physically present, he was still at Grimmauld Place on Remus's advice until the review formally cleared him, which was the kind of cautious sensible thinking that Sirius himself had almost certainly found insufferable. But Harry had spoken to him that morning through the mirror, and Sirius had been pacing, which Harry could tell because the mirror kept showing him at slightly different angles. Stop moving, Harry had said. I can't stop moving. I've been in that house for a year. 3 more hours. Sit down. You sound exactly like your father when he was being responsible, Sirius had said, which was apparently the highest and most complicated form of compliment in his vocabulary. It's extremely irritating. Good, Harry had said. Sit down. The public gallery was filling around him now. He registered the precise moment when the senior ministry officials noticed him, a small ripple of stiffening postures, the kind of collective physical reaction that moves through a group of people who are all trying not to visibly react to the same thing. He had been, previously, a person that rooms reacted to with a mixture of deference, discomfort, and a careful management of expectations. He was finding that those reactions had changed in texture over the past 3 days. They were rawer now. More honest. People who were nervous of him were properly nervous, not just performing caution, and people who weren't were remarkably easy to identify. Dumbledore was not present. His suspension from the Wisengamot meant he couldn't be here, and Harry was aware that this was its own peculiar thing, the first major wizarding legal proceeding in 60 years from which Albus Dumbledore was excluded. The chair where he usually sat was occupied by a deputy chief warlock who kept glancing at it with the expression of a man sleeping in someone else's bed. The proceedings opened and Harry listened. Iris was precise and devastating. She laid out the timeline of Sirius Black's arrest and imprisonment in 8 minutes without raising her voice once, which was its own kind of eloquence. No trial. No wand examination. No veritaserum. A confession shouted in a public street by a man who had just watched 12 muggles and his best friend's secret keeper apparently die, while surrounded by ministry officials who were, in the chaos of that morning, apparently too overwhelmed to follow their own procedures. The question before this panel, Iris said, at the end of her opening, is not whether Sirius Black is guilty of the charges for which he was imprisoned. It is whether those charges were ever legally established. And the answer to that question is documented, simple, and unambiguous. They were not. The ministry's representative, a slightly gray man named Crouch who was, Harry gathered, filling in for someone more senior who'd developed a sudden pressing engagement elsewhere, made the argument for the prosecution's position, which was essentially that the absence of formal proceedings was a regrettable administrative irregularity rather than a fundamental violation of rights. He said this with the conviction of a man who knew he was losing before he started and had decided to lose with professional dignity. The 3 judges took 40 minutes. They came back and the senior judge, a woman with a long gray plait and the focused expression of someone who had been doing this work for 30 years and had not stopped being angry about things that deserved anger, announced that the evidence for unlawful imprisonment was conclusive, that all charges against Sirius Black were formally vacated, that the ministry was ordered to issue a full public correction, and that compensation proceedings could be initiated at the petitioner's discretion. The chamber went through that complicated group silence of people receiving news they'd been expecting and still finding it substantial. Harry pulled out his two-way mirror before the room had finished adjusting and said, "Sirius." The mirror fogged and cleared. Sirius Black's face appeared. He looked like he was standing in the hallway of Grimmauld Place. He looked like he'd been standing very still for 40 minutes. "Well," he said. "You're free," Harry said. The silence from the mirror lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Sirius said, "Say that again." "All charges vacated," Harry said. "You're free. Legally. Completely." Another silence. When Sirius spoke again, his voice had a quality Harry had not heard in it before, something that had been held in check so long that releasing it sounded almost like the breath after pain stops rather than joy. "Harry," he said. "I know," Harry said. "Come to Hogwarts. We need to talk in person. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Take an hour. Have a proper breakfast first. Eat something that isn't from Grimmauld Place." A sound that might have been a laugh. "You're very bossy," Sirius said. "It's extraordinary." 1 hour, Harry said, and put the mirror away. He became aware, as he stood to leave, that a significant portion of the Wisengamot chamber was watching him. Not with the usual mixture of celebrity discomfort and institutional unease, but with something more direct and less manageable. He was the boy whose situation had, in 3 days, reshuffled the most powerful positions in Wizarding Britain. He had filed charges against the man who had occupied the moral center of their world for 6 decades. He had walked into the DMLE without an appointment and walked out with 2 cases opened and 1 will unsealed. He had done all of this at 15, without being asked, without being directed, without anyone's plan accommodating the possibility that he would simply decide what needed doing and do it. He met several of those watching gazes on his way out, directly and without performance, and the ones who didn't look away were the ones he noted. The grounds of Hogwarts in late September had that particular quality of light that comes when the air has gone cold and the sky stays blue anyway, brittle and clear, everything lit sharply, no softness left in the season. Harry walked out through the main doors and across the stone bridge and stood at the edge of the lake with his hands in his pockets and his face in the sun, waiting. Sirius arrived in just under an hour, which meant he had actually eaten something, which meant Remus had made him. Harry heard him on the bridge before he saw him, boots on stone, a quick stride, the sound of someone moving like a person who has just remembered that movement is a right and not a privilege. He turned around and Sirius Black walked toward him across the grass in a grey coat that was slightly too large and with the kind of energy that came from a year of containment finding its exit. They stood 6 feet apart and looked at each other. Sirius looked different in person than in the mirror. Thinner than he should have been, with the particular leanness of someone whose body had been through things and was still compensating. His hair was still long and his eyes were still sharp, and the resemblance to the Azkaban photograph was fading now, replaced by something that was increasingly just himself, the real person who had been in there all along. "You look like him," Sirius said. "You always did. But now you look like him without, there was always something missing before. Or, not missing. Pressed down." "I know," Harry said. Sirius covered the remaining distance and pulled Harry into a hug that was brief and fierce and entirely unlike the careful, slightly performative warmth that Harry remembered from their previous in-person meeting. This was just real. Sirius didn't say anything during it and neither did Harry, and when they separated they were both looking somewhere slightly to the left of each other for a moment in the way that people do when they've felt something they're not quite ready to articulate. They sat by the lake. Sirius had brought food, as it turned out, something wrapped in brown paper that Remus had made, which was cold by now but that Harry ate anyway because he was very nearly always hungry lately, which he understood to be a straightforward physiological consequence of his magical core running at full capacity and requiring substantial fuel. "Tell me what you're thinking," Sirius said. "Not what you've done, I know what you've done, Remus has been tracking the coverage. Tell me what you're actually thinking." Harry looked at the lake. The giant squid was doing something near the surface in the far distance, a slow and private business. "I'm thinking about the Horcruxes," he said. "I'm thinking about the window. Voldemort reconstituted himself in June and he spent the summer rebuilding. He's been underground. Bones told me this morning that there have been 3 Death Eater incidents in the past month, low level, testing the water stuff. He's not ready to move openly yet. How long until he is? I don't know. Months, probably. Maybe less." Harry took a breath. "There are 5 remaining Horcruxes and I have enough information from Dumbledore's pensieve to start narrowing down where they might be. The locket was something he stole from a girl at the orphanage. He was obsessed with famous magical lineages, so it's probably something historically significant. There's a cup that belonged to Helga Hufflepuff that he acquired when he worked for Borgin and Burke's. A ring that belonged to his maternal family. I think there's something at Hogwarts. He asked Dumbledore for the defense against the dark arts position and was turned down, which means he had a reason to want back into the school. And the snake." He paused. "I think the snake is one." Sirius was quiet for a moment, following the logic. "Nagini. If he put a soul fragment into a living creature, that complicates things. It can move. It can be anywhere. It's also protected." Harry turned the problem over. "But it's also the most vulnerable, eventually. Living vessels age and die. He'd know that. Which means he'd plan for it." "You've been thinking about this since the graveyard," Sirius said. "I've been thinking about it since the graveyard in the new way since the library," Harry corrected. "Before that I was thinking about it in the managed way. The managed way mostly involved feeling scared and not knowing why and being grateful that I had a plan." He paused. "Turns out the plan was designed to end with me dead." Sirius didn't move for a moment. "Tell me," he said quietly. Harry told him. He told him about the soul fragment theory, about the scar, about the pensieve sessions and what Dumbledore had said and hadn't said and what the logical conclusion of the original plan had been. He told it cleanly, without theatrical emphasis, just the facts arranged in the order that made them most comprehensible. When he finished, Sirius was looking at the lake with the same controlled fury stillness that Harry had noticed in the mirror conversation 3 days ago. "He was going to let you walk to your death," Sirius said. He was going to position me so I'd choose to, Harry said. Which is different, in his mind. I don't think he'd have forced it. I think he'd have given me the information at exactly the right moment for me to make what he'd have called a free choice. With the loyalty charm installed, Sirius said flatly. With the loyalty charm installed, Harry agreed. A long quiet. I can't kill him, Sirius said finally. Can't kill Dumbledore. I genuinely cannot. I know, Harry said. But if I'm in the same room with him and he, I know, Harry said again. I'm not asking you to be reasonable about it. I'm just telling you the shape of things so you know where we are. Sirius looked at him. We, he said. You're my guardian, Harry said. Legally, as of yesterday. My parents wrote your name down and meant it. I meant what I said in the mirror, we're doing this together. You don't go back to Grimmauld Place and wait for news. You're here. With me. Sirius's expression did something that it moved through quickly, a flash of the raw undisguised thing before the characteristic ironic front reassembled. James would have, he started. Tell me later, Harry said. Right now I need you to help me work out a containment strategy for the most dangerous man in Britain who is currently sitting in my headmaster's office without his magic. Sirius blinked. Dumbledore. He knows things I still need. He's been undefended and honest since the charm collapse because he literally can't be anything else right now, his manipulation tools require the full magical capacity he no longer has. But that won't last. He'll find a way to be useful again, and when he does, the clarity of our conversations will change. Harry stood, brushing grass from his trousers. I want to get everything out of him before that window closes too. Sirius stared at him for a moment, then stood, and they walked back up to the castle together. You're 15 years old, Sirius said. I'm aware. I'm just saying. Sirius. You're remarkably frightening for someone who has your father's exact hair. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it. The atmosphere in Hogwarts had changed in ways that were both obvious and subtle. The student body had reorganized itself around the new information the way students always reorganize themselves around significant events, in clusters of intense conversation, in careful watching of the staff, in the specific social pressure of a shared experience that everyone is still processing. Harry walked through it with the awareness that he was both the cause and the center of it, and found that this bothered him considerably less than it would have 4 days ago. Several students looked at him directly and he looked back, and the ones who'd always been friendly remained friendly, and the ones who'd been cautious were more cautious, and that was simply the accurate distribution of relationships as they actually existed. Draco Malfoy appeared in the corridor outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom with the energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Potter, Malfoy said. Harry stopped. Sirius stopped beside him. Malfoy looked, Harry noted, slightly different from the version he remembered from last year, or rather, Harry's perception of him was different. Previously he'd registered Malfoy as primarily an irritant, a recurring obstacle to be navigated past with minimum engagement. Now, looking at him with clear eyes, what he saw was a boy performing his father's worldview with decreasing conviction, the seams of it showing in small ways, the slight uncertainty behind the habitual sneer, the way his eyes went to Sirius and then away too quickly. Malfoy, Harry said. What you did with the Ministry, Malfoy said, with the careful precision of someone selecting each word from a limited selection of safe options. The charges against Dumbledore. He paused. My father is on the Hogwarts Board of Governors. I know, Harry said. The board has been trying to remove Dumbledore for 2 years. He's been blocking them through Wizengamot influence. With his authority suspended, the board can move, Harry said. Malfoy held his gaze for a slightly uncomfortable beat. My father will want to use that to install someone more. He appeared to struggle with the available vocabulary, sympathetic to certain positions. I know that too, Harry said. I have a recommendation for interim headship that I'm submitting to the board through my own legal representative. It won't be who your father wants, but it will be someone the board can accept because it's a compromise candidate, not a political appointment. He paused. You're telling me this because you want me to know your father's position in advance. Why? Malfoy's jaw shifted. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite anything yet, it was the raw material of something, unfinished and unsettled. Because whoever ends up running this school, he said, matters quite a lot right now. Harry looked at him steadily. Yes, he said. It does. Are you going to be a problem? Another beat. No, Malfoy said. Good, Harry said, and walked on. Behind him, he heard Sirius say, very quietly, fascinating. McGonagall was in her office when Harry knocked, which was not a surprise, since McGonagall was almost always in her office when she wasn't in class, and the quality of the current situation was such that she was clearly spending her non-class hours processing the moral weight of the past week in the only way that worked for her, which was through paperwork and very strong tea. He'd asked for this meeting specifically. He had a proposal. Interim headmistress, he said, sitting across her desk from her. McGonagall put down her quill. I beg your pardon. The Board of Governors is going to move on Dumbledore's position within the week, Harry said. Probably sooner. Lucius Malfoy is going to propose someone, I don't know who, but the general category of person is obvious. I'm submitting a recommendation to the board through Iris Blackthorne's office today, as the legal representative of the Potter estate, which happens to be one of the founding family lines of Hogwarts and therefore has formal standing in governance decisions. He met her eyes. I'm recommending you. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Harry, she said, and then stopped, and collected herself. This is not, you've been deputy headmistress for 20 years, Harry said. You know every administrative decision this school has made in that period. You have the trust of the staff. You have the respect of the student body, even the students who complain about you, which is most of them. You have no political affiliation that compromises your independence. He paused. And you owe me, he added, and it came out simply, without cruelty, just true. The silence in McGonagall's office was very complete. That's not, she started. Stopped. Started again. That's an extraordinarily blunt thing to say. Yes, Harry said. It is. But it's accurate, and we're past the part where you need me to be careful with things that are accurate. He held her gaze. You saw where he put me. You didn't stop it. You've been in this school my entire time here, and there have been things done to me that you could have questioned, and you deferred instead. I'm not asking you to atone for that, I don't want atonement. I want someone running this school who will do the job properly for the rest of my time here, and you are that person. He leaned forward slightly. But only if you accept that you answer to the students first. Not the ministry, not the board, not any old loyalties. The students. McGonagall looked at him with an expression that had moved through several phases since he started talking and arrived somewhere that was simply respect, old, complicated, genuine respect of the kind that doesn't require fondness to function, though in this case it had that too. I accept the condition, she said. I'll accept the nomination. Good, Harry said. One more thing. He set a folded piece of parchment on her desk. Dolores Umbridge Special Inspectorate Authority. I want it challenged through the board simultaneously with your nomination. If she's appointed High Inquisitor by the Ministry while the headship is in question, she fills the power vacuum. We need to move fast enough that there isn't one. McGonagall unfolded the parchment. She read it. Her expression went through one more phase that involved something very close to approval. You've been thinking about this for days. Since the morning after the scan, Harry said. It seemed obvious. To you, perhaps, she said. To anyone who was actually thinking about it, Harry said pleasantly, and left. The week moved fast. On Wednesday, the Board of Governors voted 6-3 to suspend Dumbledore's headship pending the outcome of the legal investigation. McGonagall's nomination was submitted and approved by the same margin, Lucius Malfoy had voted against, as expected, but he'd been outmaneuvered on the compromise framing, and a no vote on McGonagall without a viable alternative put him in the position of appearing obstructionist rather than principled. Draco had watched the news board in the common room with an expression that suggested he'd known in advance and had told his father, and that his father had not taken the advice. On Thursday, Umbridge made her move. Harry had expected it, just not quite this fast. She arrived at breakfast with an educational decree signed by Fudge that appointed her High Inquisitor with authority over all academic staff, effective immediately. She presented it to McGonagall across the staff table with the pleasant finality of someone laying down a winning hand. McGonagall read it. She set it down. She looked at Umbridge with an expression that was perfectly controlled and completely unimpressed. The Board of Governors' authority over this school supersedes ministerial educational appointments in matters of staffing and conduct, she said. Educational Decree 14 applies to staff conduct investigation. My appointment is a governance decision, not a staffing matter. If Minister Fudge wishes to challenge the board's authority, he may do so through the Wisengamot. She picked up her fork. The Wisengamot, which is currently operating without its chief warlock, whose suspension was also a board decision. Umbridge's pleasant expression held for a full 3 seconds before something cracked at the edges. The minister's office, she said carefully, will be in touch. I'm sure it will, McGonagall said serenely. Headmistress, she added. Harry, from the Gryffindor table, looked at his porridge to avoid letting the expression on his face become a problem. Umbridge found him after breakfast. She found him in the corridor outside Transfiguration, with purpose and momentum, having apparently spent the intervening hour recalibrating her approach to the situation. The pleasant softness was entirely gone. What was underneath it was, in some ways, more honest, a woman who was intelligent and ambitious and genuinely believed she was serving a righteous institutional order, and who was currently watching that order reorganize itself in ways she couldn't control. Mr. Potter, she said, with the professional warmth stripped back to something more direct. I think we should speak plainly. I've been waiting for that, Harry said. She stopped 3 feet from him, which was unusual. Umbridge typically moved inside conversational distance, using proximity as a control tool. Stopping at 3 feet was, he registered, an adjustment. You've been making decisions this week that affect very significant people and very significant situations, she said. The charges against Dumbledore, the Sirius Black case, the board nomination. These are not the actions of a boy responding to personal trauma. These are strategic moves. Yes, Harry said. She blinked. She'd expected more resistance, or more deflection. I underestimated you, she said. I was operating on the previous model of who you were. Most people are, Harry said. She studied him. I want to understand what you want, she said. Not the legal language. What do you actually want from all of this? Harry considered her for a moment. She was, he'd concluded, the kind of person who was most dangerous when she felt she understood you. He wasn't afraid of that. He was going to be honest because honest was more disarming to her than performance would be. I want Voldemort stopped, he said. I want the people who enabled the conditions that produced him held accountable. I want Sirius free, which is done. I want a fair investigation of what was done to me, which is in process. I want to finish my education at a school that isn't being used as a political testing ground. He met her eyes. And I want you to understand that the part of your agenda that serves those ends has my cooperation, and the part that doesn't will run into me every single time. She looked at him for a long moment. You know I'm not your friend, she said. I know, Harry said. I don't need you to be. I need you to be honest about what you want, which you just were, which I appreciate. And what do I want, she said. You want the current minister's position to be secure because your authority derives from his. You want Dumbledore diminished because his influence blocked yours for years. You want to be seen as the person who acted on the evidence when others wouldn't. He paused. 2 of those things are achievable within the framework of a fair process. One of them is going to be a problem. She was quiet. Fudge, she said. Fudge denied Voldemort's return for 14 months while Aurors died and witnesses were ignored, Harry said. That is not a defensible position and you know it. Eventually that bill comes due and anyone too closely associated with it gets swept up in the accounting. He kept his voice completely neutral. I'm not your enemy, Madam Umbridge. But I'm not your instrument either. If your future requires honest process, we can work in the same direction. If it requires me being manageable, you'll find that's no longer on offer. Umbridge was quiet for long enough that the Transfiguration classroom door opened and students began filing out around them, parting around the two of them in the corridor the way water parts around rocks, sensing without being told that something was happening here that had edges. I see, she said finally. I thought you would, Harry said. She walked away with the measured tread of someone who has just recalculated several things simultaneously, and Harry watched her go and felt, distantly, the specific satisfaction of a conversation that had gone exactly as intended. That was either very smart or extremely dangerous, said a voice from behind him. He turned. Hermione was standing with her books pressed to her chest, watching Umbridge retreating back. Both, Harry said. It's usually both. Are you coming to the study session? Obviously, she said, falling in beside him. The study sessions had been going for 3 days. They'd started informally, Harry and Ron in the library working through the Horcrux problem, Hermione joining with armfuls of reference material, Neville arriving with the focused determination of someone who had decided he was done being peripheral to important things. Ginny Weasley had appeared on the second day with a directness that brooked no discussion, sat down, and begun researching wizarding bloodline magic with the efficient focus of someone who understood exactly what kind of knowledge was going to be needed. Luna Lovegood had simply been there when they arrived on the third day, reading something upside down, and had contributed 3 genuinely useful observations about Horcrux theory before anyone had thought to question how she'd known to come. Harry had stopped questioning it. The group that was forming around him was doing so because they had chosen to, and that was the only criterion he had for it. The session that afternoon had purpose. Harry had laid out, on a large piece of parchment pinned to one of the study tables, everything he knew about the remaining Horcruxes, the logical extrapolations from the pensive memories, the known locations from Dumbledore's research, the gaps. It looked, spread out, like the kind of strategic map that generals worked from, not like something belonging to a fifth-year study group. The ring, Hermione said, looking at the parchment. The Gaunt family ring. Dumbledore identified the Gaunt shack in Little Hangleton as the likely hiding place. It's cursed, Harry said. The ring is heavily cursed, Dumbledore said the magical resonance was unique. He was planning to retrieve it himself, which is why it's still there. His plan involved me only after he'd dealt with the obstacles. What kind of curse? Neville asked. He didn't specify in the memories. But based on the Horcrux construction notes I found in the restricted section, a compulsion curse on the vessel would be standard, designed to make anyone who approaches it want to use the object before destroying it. Harry looked at the parchment. Which is an interesting problem given what I spent the first 15 years of my life being subjected to compulsion charms. You think you're resistant now, Ginny said. I think I'm considerably more aware of when something external is attempting to influence my decision-making, Harry said. Whether that constitutes resistance, I'm not sure. But I'm better equipped to recognize it than most. The locket, Ron said. That's the one you're less sure about the location. Dumbledore tracked it to a cave on the coast, Sea Cave, magically concealed entrance, significant protection work. He found the location but hadn't yet retrieved the object. He thought it was too dangerous to attempt alone. Harry looked at the map. He's right about that. The protections involve inferi, reanimated corpses in an underground lake. Not something you want to walk into without preparation. Right, Ron said, with the specific tone of someone noting this for later. The Hufflepuff cup is almost certainly in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts, Hermione said. Bellatrix Lestrange was Voldemort's most devoted servant and she's known to have vault storage of significant magical objects. Getting into the Lestrange vault is extremely difficult, Harry said. But not impossible. I have a meeting with the Gringotts liaison office next week about the Potter estate accounting. I'm going to use that access to establish a relationship. He paused. Goblins are remarkably receptive to people who demonstrate genuine respect for their legal standing. What about the Hogwarts one? Neville asked. Harry looked at him. That's your area, he said. You know this castle better than any of us. The places that feel oldest, the places that have the most concentrated magic. If he hid something here, it would be somewhere that felt significant to him, somewhere connected to the four founders. Neville's eyes sharpened. The room of requirement, he said immediately. It stores things. An enormous amount of things. Centuries of things that students and staff have hidden there. If he wanted to conceal something in the school that no one would find by conventional searching, that's where I'd put it, Harry said. Neville nodded slowly. I'll look, he said. I know how to ask the room to show me what's hiding in it. He paused. It's complicated, but I've been working on it. Harry looked at him. There was a version of Neville from before this week who would have said this tentatively, waiting for someone to doubt him. This version stated it as a fact and moved on. Harry noted this without making a remark about it, because remarking on it would undercut the thing itself. Good, he said. They worked for 2 hours. At the end of it, the parchment looked more manageable than it had at the start, which was the test of good planning, not that everything was solved, but that everything had a direction. Harry rolled it up and tied it. One more thing, he said. Dumbledore. Everyone went still in the way they went still around that name. He knows things we still need, Harry said. The location of the sea cave. The full history of the protective enchantments on each Horcrux. The Elder Wand. He met the room's collective attention. I need to have a complete conversation with him. Final one. I want everything he has and then I want to be done consulting him. He paused. Does anyone have a problem with that? He chained you, Ginny said directly. Yes, Harry said. And he's also the only person alive who has studied Voldemort's magic in depth for 60 years. Those two things are both true. He looked around the table. I know what he did. I know exactly what it cost me. And I also know that we can't beat Voldemort on principle alone. We need the information. Nobody argued. He found Dumbledore in the hospital wing. This was a surprise, not that the headmaster might need medical attention, given the continuing magical destabilization, but that he was actually there rather than managing his decline in the privacy of his office. Madame Pomfrey had apparently insisted, with the particular authority of a medical professional who has known someone for a long time and is done accepting their preferences in the matter. Dumbledore was in a bed at the end of the ward with a dignity that was slightly at odds with the surroundings. He was reading something, which was so entirely in character that Harry found himself almost smiling at it despite everything. Harry, Dumbledore said, setting the book aside. His voice was still clear, still that distinctive warmth, the power under it was reduced but the person himself remained intact. That, Harry had decided, was important. Stripping Dumbledore of his magic hadn't changed what he fundamentally was. He was still the most intelligent person Harry had ever spoken to. He was still someone who believed, genuinely and completely, that the ends he had chosen were worth the means he had used. He was still wrong. How bad is it? Harry asked, pulling a chair up to the bedside. Not as a compassionate gesture, as a practical one. Eye-level conversations were more honest. Permanent reduction to approximately 35% capacity, Dumbledore said, with the equanimity of someone who has had time to accept this. Madame Finch was thorough in her assessment. I will be able to perform most practical magic with effort. I will not be returning to my previous level. A pause. I want you to know that I don't resent the mechanism of this. The charms were the cause. The exposure of the charms was appropriate. The outcome was predictable once the process began. "I know you don't resent it," Harry said. "That's not what I came to discuss." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I need the sea cave location. I need the full protective enchantment profile for each of the known Horcrux vessels. And I need you to tell me everything you know about the Elder Wand's current location." Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "You've been planning a direct approach to the Horcruxes." "I'm using the window," Harry said. "You know what the window is. You've been waiting for it too, that's why the pensieve was full of Voldemort's history, you were preparing me for this. You just intended to be the one directing it." He held the old man's gaze. "Tell me what I need and let me do what I was apparently always going to do. Just without the death at the end." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression. The complicated, ancient thing that Harry was beginning to understand was simply what it looked like when this man felt something genuinely and allowed it to show. "The soul fragment in the scar," Dumbledore said. "You've been thinking about how to remove it without constant contact with a fully realized magical core degrades a tethered soul fragment," Harry said. Madam Finch confirmed the theory. "The fragment has been in contact with my core for 14 years. The compulsion charms were suppressing my core's full expression. Without the suppression, my core has been running at full capacity for 6 days. The degradation process accelerated the moment the charms came off." He paused. "I want you to check it. I want to know how degraded it is now." Dumbledore reached for his wand from the bedside table. His movements were more careful than they'd once been, the casual certainty of a man at the height of his power replaced by something more deliberate. He raised it toward Harry's scar. The diagnostic was brief and quiet. When he lowered his wand, Dumbledore's expression had shifted into something that required a moment to categorize. It was surprise, but the variety of surprise that comes from something being better than expected, which, from Albus Dumbledore, was not an expression Harry had seen before. "It's severely degraded," Dumbledore said. "More than I would have predicted. The contact with your full core has been," he paused. "Approximately 40% integrity remaining. If it continues at this rate, how long?" Harry said. "Weeks," Dumbledore said. "Perhaps less. The damage is accelerating." Harry sat back. "Then I don't have to die," he said. Not triumphantly. Not with relief, quite. Just as a statement of fact, delivered in the tone of someone who had believed this was possible and is now finding out they were right. "If the fragment degrades completely on its own, the sixth Horcrux is neutralized without, you would need to maintain your current magical expression," Dumbledore said. "Any significant suppression would slow the process. Any introduction of binding enchantments, not going to happen," Harry said simply. Dumbledore looked at him. His eyes were, as always, the sharpest thing about him. "No," he said. "I imagine not." Harry stood. He held out his hand. It took Dumbledore a moment to understand the gesture. When he did, something moved through his face that Harry chose not to examine too closely because it was complicated in the way that the most important human feelings are always more complicated than the circumstances that produce them. Dumbledore took his hand. His grip was firm and dry and his hands were no longer shaking. "The cave," Harry said. And Dumbledore told him. He told him everything. The sea cave location, the boat on the underground lake, the blood toll entrance, the basin and the potion, the inferi in the water. He told him the protection profile of the ring's curse and the specific counter-enchantments most likely to neutralize it. He told him the Gringotts information he'd gathered about the Lestrange vault and the enchantments Bellatrix had placed on it personally. He told him, finally, about the Elder Wand. Harry listened to all of it without writing anything down, because he found he didn't need to. The full, clear memory of an unmanaged mind retained things without effort, a fact that would have been astonishing before this week and now felt like simply knowing something about himself. When Dumbledore had finished, the room was quiet in the way that hospital wings are quiet at the end of visiting hours, a particular, fading quality of conversation, things settling into place. "I did love you," Dumbledore said again. The same words as the office, but different here, less like a defense and more like a fact being stated for the record. "I know," Harry said. The same answer. "I think I'll be able to do something with that eventually." "I'm not there yet." "That's honest," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm working on staying that way." He left. Outside the hospital wing, Sirius was leaning against the corridor wall with his arms folded, having apparently been there for some time. He pushed off the wall when Harry emerged and fell in beside him without a word, which was, Harry had concluded, precisely the right amount of presence, close enough to matter, not so close as to crowd. They walked back toward the Gryffindor Tower through a castle that was quieter than usual, the evening having settled everyone into their common rooms and the corridors into their own company. Torches flicked in passing breezes from the high windows. The stone underfoot was warm. The magic in the walls moved with them, the way it had been moving with Harry since the morning after the scan, unhurried and enormous. "Did you get what you needed?" Sirius asked. "Everything," Harry said. "Good." A pause. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about this honestly. He thought about the medical report and the will and his mother's handwriting saying he deserves better. He thought about the pensive memories and Tom Riddle in the orphanage and the mirror of a boy who had decided that fear was a more reliable foundation than love. He thought about Dumbledore's hands, steady now, and the clarity of that last conversation, stripped of all the management on both sides, just two people who had been in an impossible arrangement trying to find what was actually true about it. "Like I know exactly where I am," Harry said. "For the first time." Sirius looked at him. "Good place to start," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "It is." Chapter 5, The War He's Choosing. The Sea Cave was exactly as horrible as Dumbledore had described it, which Harry had anticipated, and somehow worse than that description had prepared him for, which he had also anticipated. The coastline they'd arrived on was the kind of beautiful that only exists in places that are actively trying to kill you, sheer black cliffs dropping into grey water, the sea throwing itself against the rock with the tireless commitment of something that has been doing this for millennia and intends to continue regardless of your opinion on the matter. The sky was the color of old pewter. The wind had teeth. Sirius stood at the cliff edge beside Harry and looked down at the narrow ledge of rock visible between waves. "Charming," he said. "There's a hidden entrance in the cliff face," Harry said. "Dumbledore found it by bleeding on the rock. The magic responds to sacrifice." "Of course it does," Sirius said. "Every piece of dark magic I've ever encountered has the aesthetic sensibility of someone who read too many dramatic novels at a formative age." Harry held out his hand without looking at Sirius. After a pause that was approximately the length of a man deciding not to make a comment he'd already mentally composed, Sirius produced a small knife from his coat and made a shallow cut across his own palm before Harry could take it. Harry looked at him. "You're not bleeding on a cliff if I'm here," Sirius said simply. "That's non-negotiable." Harry considered arguing and decided against it on the grounds that some things didn't need to be arguments. "After you, then," he said. It had been 4 days since the conversation in the hospital wing. 4 days of very fast and very purposeful preparation, of Hermione cross-referencing every piece of information Dumbledore had given them against independent sources, of Neville spending every available hour in the room of requirement, of Ron working through the strategic problem of the sea cave with the same focused chessbrain he applied to everything complex, of Harry himself spending 2 full days in magical practice that could most accurately be described as finding out what he was actually capable of. That had been, in some ways, the most clarifying part of the week. He'd gone to the training room on the 7th floor, a room the castle had offered him without being asked, simply manifesting as available space the way Hogwarts occasionally did when it decided something was necessary, and he'd worked through every spell he knew and several he'd found in the library, and the thing he'd been aware of since the morning after the scan, the sense of depth and availability, had proven to be entirely literal. His magic didn't just work differently. It worked at a different order of magnitude. He'd thrown a reductor curse at a practice target on the first day and the target, which was a solid block of enchanted stone designed to resist exactly that, had come apart completely. Not cracked. Not damaged. Gone, the component pieces scattered across the room, the magical resistance of it simply insufficient for what had hit it. He'd stood in the resulting dust and felt, not pride exactly, but a kind of quiet, interested recognition. Like finding a door in your house that you'd always walked past and discovering behind it a room that was larger than the house should be able to contain. He'd spent the rest of that day learning the size of the room. By the end of the second day he had a reasonable working sense of it. His raw magical output was, at minimum, equivalent to a fully trained senior auror at peak. His precision was slightly behind his power. The charms had apparently suppressed raw output more thoroughly than they'd suppressed fine control, possibly because fine control was more useful in the managed version of Harry they'd been building. His occlumency, once he understood what it was and that he had a natural aptitude for it, snapped into place in about 40 minutes of concentrated effort with the ease of someone picking up a skill their hands already knew. That had been perhaps the best moment of the week. The feeling of his own mind closing like a fist, ordered, protected, completely his own. Nobody was getting in there again. Sirius pressed his palm against the cliff face and the rock shifted with the heavy, reluctant sound of magic that had been undisturbed for a very long time. The entrance was narrow and dark and smelled of salt and something older and less identifiable. Harry stepped through without hesitation. Sirius followed. The rock sealed behind them. The cave was worse than he'd imagined in the dark, specific way that spaces with genuinely evil intent about them are worse when you're actually in them. The underground lake was black and flat as obsidian, the green-tinged light from its surface making everything look like it was happening at the bottom of deep water. The stone boat was exactly where Dumbledore had described it. The basin on the island was clearly visible from the near shore, a pale stone dish holding something luminescent. Harry stepped into the boat. Sirius stepped in beside him. The inferi, Harry said, quietly, as the boat moved without instruction across the flat black surface. They're in the water. They respond to contact with the surface. If we go into the water, we're in significant trouble. We're not going in the water, Sirius said, equally quiet. What's the plan for the basin? The potion has to be drunk, Harry said. Full basin. Can't be vanished or transfigured, Dumbledore tested every conventional shortcut. It has to go into a person and it causes extreme pain and magical hallucinations and I assume various other delightful effects. He paused. I'm doing it. Don't argue. I'm going to argue, Sirius said immediately. You're going to argue and I'm going to explain why it has to be me and then we're going to move on, Harry said, with the patience of someone who has pre-run this conversation in their head. My magical core is running at full capacity and has been for over a week. The potion's effects are partly designed to overload the victim's magical defenses to force compliance. My defenses are, he considered the accurate description, not what they were. The potion will still work. The pain will still be real. But the magical component of the torment will hit a wall it wasn't built for. A pause. That is sound reasoning, Sirius said, with the tone of a man who finds this deeply inconvenient. I know, Harry said. I still don't like it. You don't have to like it. They reached the island. Harry stepped off the boat onto the rock and looked at the basin. It was about 18 inches across, carved from the same pale stone as the cave walls, and the luminescent potion in it moved with a slow purposeful quality that suggested awareness. He'd seen potions that did that before, intent-responsive brews that reacted to the intentions of the person in contact with them. Dark magic at its most sophisticated was always personal. He looked at the locket in the center of the basin, a heavy golden oval, ornate, with a serpentine S visible on the front. Even at this distance he could feel the wrongness of it, the specific quality of something that housed an involuntary occupant, a fragment of a human soul that had been ripped from its source and imprisoned in gold. It felt like standing near an open wound. He picked up the goblet chained to the side of the basin. Harry, Sirius said. I know, Harry said. Keep watch on the water. The moment anything moves, light, as much of it as you can make. Inferi hate fire and light equally. I know how inferi work, Sirius said, clipped with controlled feeling. Then we're both prepared, Harry said, and scooped the first goblet from the basin. The first mouthful was like drinking liquid fire that had learned to feel like grief. He had expected pain. He had not entirely anticipated the specific flavor of it. The potion found the things you loved and used them as vectors for the torment, which was elegant in a horrible way, a personalized suffering machine. He saw his parents. He saw Cedric falling. He saw the graveyard in real time, the green flash, Voldemort's reconstructed face. He saw, briefly and very clearly, every moment from which the compulsion charms had stolen his own authentic response, every time he'd felt something true and felt it replaced with something managed, the sum total of 14 years of being someone else's instrument, all of it arriving simultaneously as the potion's working. He took the second goblet. His hands were steady. This was the thing the potion hadn't accounted for. Harry Potter, entirely himself and not afraid of his own memories, was a different proposition than Harry Potter the managed instrument. The visions were real and they hurt, and he looked at every one of them clearly, because they were part of what had happened, and refusing to see them would have been the managed response, and he was done with managed responses. Third goblet. The water around the island began to move. Harry, Sirius said sharply. Keep them back, Harry said, and took the fourth goblet, and the fifth. Sirius sent a blasting curse into the water that lit the cave up white for 3 full seconds, and the surface heaved and the first set of hands appeared at the island's edge, pale and reaching, and he hit them with a flame-freezing charm that didn't burn but bound, the inferi's cold fingers closing around nothing. Harry kept drinking. The cave kept moving around him, the light shifting, the visions cycling through their catalogue of everything that had cost him something, and he stood at the center of it and was exactly himself and kept drinking because the alternative was Voldemort winning, and that had never actually been acceptable to him even when he'd been shaped to accept it passively. By the 10th goblet he was on his knees on the island rock. Not collapsed, deliberately kneeling, one hand on stone, maintaining his position because falling was not the same as kneeling and he'd chosen to kneel. His vision was doing something that was more interesting than distressing, overlaying the cave with images that were half memory and half the potion's construction, so that he could see both simultaneously. He could see Sirius fighting the inferi at the water's edge with the controlled ferocity of a man who had spent 12 years in Azkaban and had emerged with a personal relationship with darkness that meant he wasn't afraid of it so much as deeply, technically familiar. He could see the locket glowing in the basin. 11th goblet. 12th. He picked up the locket. The moment his hand closed around it, the potion's effect hit a new register. The thing inside it, the soul fragment, recognized that it was being touched and responded with everything available to it, which was fear and rage and the specific, personal fury of something that did not want to stop existing. It poured that fury into Harry's hand and he felt it. He also felt his own magical core push back. It was automatic, the way a physical immune response is automatic, not deliberate, not strategic, just the fundamental incompatibility of his fully expressed magical nature and the dark fragment touching it. The locket crackled. The S on its surface burned hot and gold and then a deep, ugly red. Harry tightened his grip. Sirius, he said. Basilisk Fawn. Sirius had exactly 1 moment of registering this instruction before he understood it and drove his hand into his coat pocket and produced one of the 3 preserved basilisk fangs Harry had spent considerable effort extracting from the Hogwarts trophy room earlier that week, which had involved a conversation with the trophy room's magical catalogue that he preferred not to revisit. He threw it across the island. Harry caught it. He pressed the point of the fang against the locket. The soul fragment in it screamed. Not metaphorically, a sound came from the locket that was not sound in any conventional sense, a frequency that existed in the place between hearing and feeling, and the inferi in the water went still the way animals go still before weather changes. Harry drove the fang through the locket's face, and the light that erupted from it was not the green-tinged cave light and not the white of his own Patronus but something between them, a sickly brightness that lasted 4 seconds and then collapsed inward with a sound like a door slamming in a room you hadn't known had a door. The locket was cold in his hands. Just gold now. Just an object. Harry stood up. His knees protested. The potion was still in him, working through its diminishing cycle, and the cave was still dark and the inferi were still there but drifting now, uncertain, the driving intelligence behind them reduced without the Horcrux's proximity. He walked to the boat. Sirius was already in it, one hand extended to pull him aboard, which Harry took without commentary. They crossed the black water in silence. At the cliff entrance, waiting for the rock to open, Sirius said, "Are you hurt?" "Yes," Harry said. "I'll be fine." "That's not actually the same thing." "No," Harry said. "But one follows from the other, in this case." The rock opened. The sea wind hit him like a correction and Harry stood on the cliff ledge in the grey morning air, completely drenched in cave water from an inferi he'd had to physically remove from his ankle in the last 10 feet of crossing, holding a destroyed Horcrux in one hand and a basilisk fang in the other, and looked at the sky and felt the specific clean exhaustion of something genuinely completed. 2 down. 4 remaining. He'd give himself until they got back to Hogwarts before the next stage, which was generous by his current standards but which Sirius was going to insist on regardless. They were back by midday. The group was in the room of requirement when Harry and Sirius arrived, which told Harry immediately that Neville had found something. He opened the door to a room that looked like a library had exploded inside a cathedral, towers of objects in every direction, a century of accumulated hiding reaching to ceilings that were lost in darkness, the specific archaeological quality of things that have been forgotten so thoroughly that the forgetting itself has become architectural. Neville was standing in the far center of the room with his arms folded and the expression of someone who has been right and has been waiting for someone worth being right at to arrive. "Ravenclaw's diadem," Neville said, and pointed. It was on a high stone shelf between a broken telescope and what appeared to be a taxidermied Kneazle. Dull silver, wing-shaped. Even across the room's considerable distance it had that same quality the locket had had, the wrongness of a vessel, the weight of involuntary occupation. "How did you find it?" Ron asked. "I asked the room to show me anything that felt like it didn't belong to itself," Neville said. "That felt like it was more than it looked." He paused. "There were about 40 things like that in here, which is a separate problem for a different day. But only one of them had that specific quality of," he gestured, "wrongness." "That's good instinct," Harry said. "I've been practicing instinct," Neville said. Harry crossed the room, scaled a tower of stacked Hogwarts detritus with the ease of someone who currently had very little patience for obstacles, and brought the diadem down. It sat in his hands with the same hostile presence as the locket, the soul fragment aware, the dark magic pressing back. He handed it to Hermione. "Analyze the protection profile," he said. "I want to know if the curse is different from the locket before we destroy it." Hermione was running her wand over it before he'd finished speaking. "The curse structure is older," she said, frowning at the diagnostic light. "More sophisticated. It's not responding to a standard destructive approach." She looked at it carefully. The Horcrux fragment is using the diadem's original enchantments as a buffer. Ravenclaw's diadem had genuine magical properties, the soul fragment has integrated with them. "Can a basilisk fang get through that?" Ron asked. "Fiend fire would definitely get through it," Ginny said, from the corner of the room where she'd been examining the diadem's magical signature from a distance with the assessment of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about destructive magic. "But fiend fire in this room would set everything on fire." "Controlled fiend fire," Harry said. "There's no such," Hermione started. Harry raised an eyebrow. She stopped. Reassessed. Looked at him. "There's no documented methodology for controlled fiend fire," she said carefully. "I'd like to try to write one," Harry said. It took 40 minutes and resulted in a technique that Hermione immediately began documenting in rigorous detail, which was probably going to become part of the literature on the subject at some future point. The controlled application was not elegant, it required maintaining the fire at a precise temperature threshold where it burned dark magic constructs and didn't burn anything else, a distinction that required a level of fine magical control that Harry had been surprised to find he possessed until he remembered that he'd had it suppressed for 14 years and was making up for lost time. The diadem came apart in a sound like breaking glass, the fragments' dissolution more violent than the lockets had been, a rush of dark bright energy that sent every loose object in a 10-foot radius skittering across the floor. 3 down. The ring was that afternoon. Little Hangleton was a 40-minute apparition relay. Harry still couldn't apparate, which was the one significant limitation he'd encountered in his current capabilities, age being a non-negotiable magical law rather than a management decision. Sirius took him on side-along, which Sirius described as extremely undignified and Harry found entirely acceptable as a method of transport. The gaunt shack was worse than the cave in a different way. Where the cave had been dramatically hostile, the shack was simply miserable. It crouched in its overgrown lot like something that had decided to become ruins without going through the intermediate step of ceasing to be inhabited. The magic around it was layered and old and deeply unpleasant, the residue of generations of what happened when powerful wizarding blood was combined with poverty and resentment and isolation. The ring was inside. Harry knew it without looking, he could feel it, the same wrongness concentrated in a specific location, under the floorboards in the back room. The curse on it was, as Dumbledore had described, unique. It was not a compulsion charm in the standard sense, it was something more insidious, a working that operated on the interface between desire and regret, that found what you most wanted to undo in your life and offered it to you with the ring as the apparent mechanism. Not force. Temptation. The particular, sophisticated cruelty of something that made you reach for it yourself. Harry crouched over it in the dust of the gaunt shack and felt the curse try to find its leverage. He waited. He felt it searching, skimming across the surface of his mind for the regret, the grief, the thing he'd most want to change. It found his parents. Of course it found his parents. It offered him the shape of what putting on the ring would feel like, the image of Lily and James Potter alive and whole and possible, the specific unbearable hope of it. He sat with that for a moment. He didn't put the ring on. He sat with the grief of his parents honestly, the way he'd been sitting with it since the will, since Sirius's stories, since the memory of his mother's handwriting. He let it be what it was, enormous and true and permanent and not something that could be undone by a Horcrux's manipulation or anyone else's well-intentioned management. He picked up the ring with a conjured cloth, placed the basilisk thong against its band, and drove it through. The curse broke outward in a wave that knocked him 3 feet backward across the floor, which was inelegant, and Sirius appeared in the doorway and said several things that were colorful enough that Harry stored them for later reference, and the ring was simply a cracked band of gold and stone on the floor, and the soul fragment was gone. 4 down. 2 remaining. He sat up from the shack floor and looked at the ring's remains and felt, underneath the physical unpleasantness of the backlash, a specific and grounded emotion that he identified, after a moment, as grief properly processed. Not suppressed, not redirected, not managed. Just felt fully and set down. "You all right?" Sirius asked, from the doorway. "Yes," Harry said. "Actually yes, this time." The Gringotts meeting was the following morning. Harry had requested it through the Potter Estate Inquiry Channel, which gave him legitimate standing without requiring him to explain himself in advance. The Gringotts account manager, a goblin named Sharpclaw who had the particular personal authority of someone who had been doing financially significant work for a very long time and had developed strong opinions about humans who wasted his time, received Harry in a room that was all ledger wood and lamplight and gave off the atmosphere of a place where money was taken seriously as a concept. Harry sat across from Sharpclaw and put his cards on the table. He explained the Potter estate discrepancy, the withdrawals that had been made by third parties since 1981, which the estate accounting had confirmed were real and significant and unauthorized in terms of his parents' documented wishes. He explained what he needed in terms of access. He was direct and specific and demonstrated, through the nature of his questions, that he understood the difference between what Gringotts could legally do and what it would politically prefer to avoid, which were not always the same thing. Sharpclaw listened. His expression did not change throughout. When Harry finished, Sharpclaw put his fingers together and said, "The Lestrange Vault." "Yes," Harry said. "You are aware that entering a vault other than one you have legal standing in is a violation of Gringotts security policy." "I'm aware," Harry said. "I'm also aware that the item housed in the Lestrange Vault is classified under the Magical Weapons and Artifacts Act of 1756 as a weapon of mass dark magical potential, and that the legal framework for seizure of such items, when credibly identified to Gringotts management, includes mandatory cooperation with the identified legal authority, which in this case, given that I am the subject of the relevant ministry investigation and have Amelia Bones's office as my documented legal liaison, means you are required to facilitate access." A very long silence. "You researched this," Sharpclaw said. "Thoroughly," Harry said. Sharpclaw looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a goblin who is recalculating the human across from him. "The standard procedure for such access requires a ministry warrant," he said. "The warrant application process takes 14 days. I can have Madam Bones issue an emergency warrant in 12 hours, Harry said. "Given the active threat profile of the item's associated wizard." Another silence. Sharpclaw made a small note. "The Lestrange Vault is heavily cursed," he said. "Multiplication and burning curses on the contents. Touching anything triggers both." "I won't be touching the contents," Harry said. "I'll be touching one item that I can identify precisely before entry." Sharpclaw considered this for the full length of time it required. "Present the emergency warrant within 24 hours, he said. "The access will be arranged." He paused. "The Potter estate withdrawals made between 1981 and present, you want a full accounting." "Itemized," Harry said. "With the authorization documents for each withdrawal." "The authorization documents will be interesting," Sharpclaw said, with the tone of a professional who already knows this and has found it so for some time. "Several of them bear signatures that the account activity suggests were not voluntarily made." Harry met his eyes. "I expected that," he said. "Thank you for telling me." He went to Bones that afternoon and had the emergency warrant by 8 that evening. He was back at Gringotts the following morning with Hermione and Ron, which Sharpclaw accepted with the composed pragmatism of a goblin who had expected that this was going to involve multiple humans. The vault cart descended through the tunnels in the dark and the cold and the particular vertiginous speed of the Gringotts underground system, which Ron handled with focused determination and Hermione handled with her eyes closed and the expression of someone applying all available mental resources to not commenting on the speed. The Lestrange Vault was vast and dark and filled with the accumulated dark magic artifact collection of 3 generations of committed Voldemort supporters. Harry stood in the entrance and felt the curse on the contents, the doubling enchantment, the burning that would activate on contact, and scanned the vault from the doorway. The cup was on a shelf to the left. Badger-shaped handle, golden, with Helga Hufflepuff's distinctive marking on the base. Even at 15 feet, the soul fragment inside it registered against Harry's magical senses like a note played in a wrong key. He reached out. Not physically. He extended the magic, the full, unmanaged, available magic that had been sitting in him since the charm removal like a room full of ready light, and wrapped it around the cup at a distance, the way you wrap your hand around a glass of water from above. The multiplication curse fired and doubled a space of empty air to the cup's left. The burning curse activated and burned nothing because nothing physical was touching the cup. He lifted it off the shelf, through the air, into his waiting hand, without taking a single step into the vault. Ron made a sound that was very quiet and very sincere. Hermione opened her eyes. The cup came apart on the basilisk fong with a sound like a struck bell, long and resonant, and the vault filled briefly with golden light that had nothing to do with the gold stacked on the shelves, and then it was just a cup, and Harry set it down on the vault floor and stepped back, and they went back up through the tunnels to the daylight. 5 down. Nagini was the problem. He'd known it was going to be the problem. The snake was Voldemort's companion, his constant, the vessel that moved with him wherever he was, which meant that destroying the 6th Horcrux was not a separate operation from facing Voldemort himself. They were the same event. He worked through this in the evenings, in the quiet of the Gryffindor common room or the training room, turning the problem over with the same methodical attention he'd been bringing to everything. Voldemort was consolidating. Bones's intelligence updates had been tracking 3 confirmed Death Eater gathering sites in the past week. The pattern of them suggested preparation rather than operation, a general assembling of forces before a committed offensive move. The window was still open. Narrowing, but open. He was in the training room on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the Sea Cave, working through a sequence of defensive combinations that had become almost meditative in their practice, when the Hogwarts castle did something unusual. Every torch in the training room lit at once. All of them, simultaneously, as if the building had inhaled and held it. Harry stopped moving. Then the castle exhaled. The torches settled. But the magic in the walls had changed quality, a new current in it, different from the familiar ambient warmth. Something arriving. He was running before he'd consciously decided to, out of the training room and down the corridor, taking the stairs 3 at a time, following the change in the castle's magic the way you follow a sound you recognize in a crowd. Through the 6th floor, the 5th, down toward the entrance hall, and he came around the last corner and found McGonagall standing at the top of the main staircase with a piece of parchment in her hand and an expression that had resolved into the specific stillness of a person who has just been informed of something and has chosen action over reaction. "He's moving," McGonagall said. "Tonight. The Ministry has received a formal declaration, Voldemort's forces are moving on the Department of Mysteries. He wants the prophecy." Harry stopped 3 feet from her. "How long have we got?" "The owl arrived 10 minutes ago. The Ministry is in chaos, Fudge is attempting to convene an emergency Wisengamot session, Bones is deploying Aurors, and Voldemort's people will be in position within the hour if the intelligence is accurate." "Is it accurate?" "Bones believes so." Harry turned. Ron was at the bottom of the stairs, he'd arrived from somewhere, running, slightly out of breath. Hermione was behind him with her traveling cloak already on. Neville was 3 steps above them. Ginny at the landing. Luna, somehow, was already at the top of the stairs beside Harry, appearing from no discernible direction with her typical composure about matters that caused other people considerable disturbance. "I go," Harry said. "Not asking. The prophecy is mine. He comes for it because he wants to know what it says and he thinks I'll lead him to it. The difference between now and the original version of this night," he stopped, because there was no need to articulate the original version, they all knew what they'd been studying, what they'd been preparing for, "is that I'm going because I'm choosing to. I know what the prophecy says. I know what's in it and what isn't. And Nagini will be there." "He'll be there," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. "He'll be there." He held Ron's eyes. "I know." "Then we're all going," Ron said. Not a discussion. "Ron, tell me I didn't choose to be here," Ron said simply. "Go on. Tell me that." Harry looked at him. He looked at all of them, Hermione with her cloak and her jaw set, Neville standing straight in a way he hadn't stood 2 weeks ago, Ginny with the direct attention of someone who had made a decision and seen no reason to revisit it, Luna serenely present as a fact of the landscape. "Right," Harry said. "Stay behind me going in. Watch Nagini as the priority. If she's there, she needs to be contained before anything else. The Aurors will have deployed by the time we arrive, which means the battle will already be engaged. We use that." Sirius appeared at the main entrance doors. He was wearing his grey coat and his expression was the particular concentrated alertness of a man who had been a fugitive for 12 years and had, during that time, developed a comprehensive relationship with situations where fast good decisions were the only viable option. "Remus is outside," he said. "We have brooms." Harry nodded. They went out into the night air and the brooms were there, 7 of them, arranged on the grass with the helpfulness of a castle that had apparently decided to be cooperative about this, and Harry mounted his firebolt with the ease of someone doing the most natural thing available to him in any moment of genuine pressure, because flying had always been the thing that was simply his, no charm required, just himself and air and speed. They lifted into the dark sky. The Ministry of Magic's atrium, when they arrived through the emergency fluke connection that Sirius had used his newly restored status to access, was already a battlefield. Aurors were deployed in the upper hall, exchanging curses with a group of black-robed figures in the echoing space around the fountain. The golden statues had been hit with something that had half-melted them, their surfaces running together in abstract shapes, the witch and wizard losing the careful distinction of their designed proportions. The floor was cracked in a long diagonal from a spell that had hit it with serious force. Harry came through the flow and assessed in about 3 seconds. 8 Death Eaters deployed in the atrium. 4 Aurors pinned behind the reception desk and the security station. 2 more Aurors down, alive, from the look of them, but out of the fight. The corridor to the lifts was blocked by a reductor barricade someone had thrown up. He sent 2 blasting curses at the barricade before anyone knew he was there. It came apart cleanly and the Death Eaters behind it scattered, and the distraction bought the pinned Aurors enough time to move. "He's in the Department of Mysteries," said one of the Aurors. Tonks, Harry recognized, with a streak of purple hair and a bleeding gash across her forearm that she was apparently treating as irrelevant. Level 9. "He went down 20 minutes ago. We can't get to the lifts, you can now," Harry said, and walked toward the lift with the focused ease of someone who has just removed the obstacle. Tonks stared at him. "Potter? What are you, coming with us or staying here?" Harry asked. She came. The lift descended with its usual absurd announcement, Level 9, Department of Mysteries, and the doors opened onto a corridor that was dark and very quiet and smelled of ozone and spent magic, the aftermath quality of a space where serious things had recently occurred. The circular room was different from how Harry had imagined it. 12 doors arranged in a perfect circle, all closed, all identical, the room turning slowly on its magical axis. But someone had already been through here. 2 of the doors were open, their alignment disrupted, the room's mechanism partially broken. There was a scorch mark on the wall that was fresh. Harry walked to the center of the room and stopped. He felt the castle's magic here, faintly. The Ministry was not Hogwarts but it was old and it had its own accumulated magic, and he'd been feeling ambient magical fields for 3 weeks now with the clarity of an instrument properly tuned. He felt Voldemort. Not through the scar. Not through the compulsion-facilitated legilimency connection that had been Dumbledore's deliberate design. Through his own perceptions, clean and direct, the specific presence of a very powerful magical being with a compromised soul, a signature that was distinctive in the way that things which have been deliberately fragmented have a distinctive quality, like music played on an instrument with broken strings. "He's in the Hall of Prophecy," Harry said. "How do you?" Tonks started. "Third door on the left," Harry said, and walked toward it. The Hall of Prophecy was vast and dark, filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves of glowing glass orbs, each one containing the recorded substance of a seer's vision. The light they gave was pale and blue and made everything look like it was underwater. It was, in its way, beautiful. Harry had a brief, clear thought about what it meant to store prophecy, to capture it and shelve it and give it a number, to make the future into an artifact that could be owned and retrieved and fought over, and the thought told him something useful about Voldemort, and about the Ministry, and about what it meant to build your entire strategy around something someone had said in a trance. Voldemort was waiting for him. Harry had expected this. Had known it the moment he understood the knight's movement, not lured, not led, but expected. Voldemort knew Harry was coming because Voldemort had designed the situation expecting that Harry would come, would be led here by the compulsion network of the original plan and would arrive off balance, reactive, manageable. Harry walked down the central aisle of the Hall of Prophecy with his wand out and his mind clean and his full magical attention on the tall, pale, terrible figure standing at the far end between 2 rows of glowing glass. Voldemort looked at him. Harry looked back. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said. His voice had the quality of someone who has spent considerable effort learning to use sound as a tool, smooth, carrying, performing confidence as a strategic choice. "You've been busy." "A bit," Harry said. Something shifted in Voldemort's expression. It was very small, barely perceptible, but Harry caught it, a flicker of recalculation, a reading of what was in front of him that came back with different data than expected. Whatever version of Harry Potter had existed in Voldemort's intelligence was not this version. The boy who had been positioned and managed and kept at the precise level of heroism required for the designated sacrifice did not walk like this, did not hold his wand like this, did not speak like this. "You've changed," Voldemort said. "Yes," Harry said. "I stopped being managed." A pause. "You know about the charms." "I know about everything that happens in that mind," Voldemort said, and the red eyes narrowed. "Or I did." "You know I closed it," Harry said. "About a week ago. That's why you moved tonight, you lost the window on the connection and you needed to move while your position was still viable." He kept walking, slowly, down the aisle. "You've been watching me through the scar link for 14 years and now you can't, and that's frightening." "I am not afraid," Voldemort said. "Tom," Harry said pleasantly, "you have been afraid of dying since you were 10 years old. Everything you've ever done has been motivated by that fear. I've spent considerable time understanding that recently." He stopped about 15 feet away. "Close enough for accuracy. Far enough for room. 4 of your Horcruxes are destroyed. 1 is in the process of natural dissolution. And Nagini was there. He'd felt her since entering the hall, the massive snake coiled somewhere in the shelves to his left, her presence that same wrong note quality amplified by her size and her cold reptile patience. "Nagini," he said, in Parseltongue. "Come out." A silence. Then a vast, dark motion from the shelves, the snake uncoiling, her head rising above the orbs, her scales catching the pale light. He heard, behind him, several people's sharp intakes of breath. He didn't look back. "You are the speaker," Nagini said, in the slow register of a very old snake. "You have the tongue." "I do," Harry said. "And I know what you are." "What's in you?" "He put it there," Nagini said. "Not distressed, just a fact. Long ago. I have carried it." "I know," Harry said. "I'm going to take it from you. It will hurt." "I'm sorry for that." "The hurt is his," Nagini said, "not yours." Harry raised his wand. What he did next was not in any textbook, which was appropriate because it was a technique he developed himself over the past week in the training room, working through the theoretical framework Hermione had extrapolated from the Horcrux literature. It was essentially a directed version of what his magical core had been doing to the scar fragment naturally, an accelerated, focused application of the incompatibility between a fully expressed magical core and a degraded soul fragment. Not a spell with words. Just magic, directed, with absolute clarity of intent. The light that came out of his wand was not a color he had a name for. Nagini convulsed. The wrongness in her blazed up and then, with the same implosive quality he'd felt in each previous destruction but larger and more visceral because this was a living creature not an object, collapsed. The snake fell still on the shelf, her great head lowering slowly until it rested on the glass of an orb that cracked under the weight. She breathed. She lived. The soul fragment was gone. Voldemort's scream was not theatrical. It was the sound a person makes when something they have been relying on for 60 years is suddenly and comprehensively taken from them, stripped out of the architecture of their survival, and it had in it the specific quality of a fear that has just been made total. The red eyes found Harry with an intensity that was simply hatred in its purest, most personal form, not the performance of menace but the genuine article. "All of them," Voldemort said. His voice had changed. The smooth control was gone. "You destroyed all of them." "Yes," Harry said. He was very calm. He had planned for this moment, had understood that it would come to this, and the planning had left him clear. "You're mortal now, Tom. For the first time since you were a teenager, you're going to die at the same time as everyone else." Voldemort raised his wand. Harry raised his wand. What happened in the next 40 seconds would be documented in 6 separate Aura reports and 2 Ministry official accounts, none of which fully agreed on the specifics, which was the natural consequence of watching something that moved faster than standard combat documentation was designed to capture. Voldemort was powerful. He was, even with every soul fragment gone, one of the most powerful wizards alive, a natural talent of the First Order, trained and developed over 60 years, with a comprehensive mastery of dark magic that represented 6 decades of single-minded study. He came at Harry with everything he had, and everything he had was considerable. Harry held. Not because the spells didn't reach him, several did, and the combat was real and physical and genuinely dangerous in the way that fighting a truly skilled and ruthless opponent is genuinely dangerous. But every time Voldemort hit something, he was hitting the full expression of Harry Potter's magical core, and the full expression of Harry Potter's magical core had been built for this. Not designed, not positioned, built, by genetics and accident and the specific, strange alchemy of what happens when enormous magical potential survives everything that tries to reduce it. The prophecy shelf behind Voldemort came down. Hundreds of orbs shattered on the floor, their whispered futures dissolving into the air, the accumulated seer visions of decades scattering into nothing, which was, Harry thought in the half-second he had for the thought, probably fine. The future didn't need to be stored on a shelf. It needed to be made. He drove Voldemort back down the aisle of the Hall of Prophecy 1 hex at a time, not recklessly, not with the bravado of someone performing their triumph, but with the focused, efficient deliberateness of someone who has done their preparation and is now executing it. Voldemort threw a killing curse. Harry stepped left and it hit a shelf and the shelf exploded in green light and more orbs came down, and in the second that took, Harry sent a binding curse that wrapped Voldemort from shoulder to ankle in magical constriction and followed it immediately with a stunner that had behind it the full, unmanaged depth of what Harry's magic actually was. Voldemort hit the floor. The green eyes were open. Breathing. Alive. But down. The doors of the Hall of Prophecy burst open and auras flooded in. Bones had arrived, and Tonks from behind Harry, and 6 others whose faces were arrangements of exhaustion and disbelief and a kind of professional relief that was its own form of awe. Harry lowered his wand. His arm was shaking slightly. His shoulder hurt where a cutting curse had clipped it 6 exchanges back. The hall smelled of spent magic and shattered glass. Sirius reached him first, came through the auras with the single-minded directness of someone to whom rules about crime scene access were not personally applicable. He grabbed Harry by the shoulders, looked at him quickly and completely, damage assessment, real and fast, and then, apparently satisfied that Harry was structurally intact, did not let go. "The shoulder," Harry said. "I see the shoulder," Sirius said. "It's fine. You're fine." He exhaled. "You absolute," he stopped. Started again. "Your father would have," stopped again. Appeared to give up on sentences and just held on for another moment. "I know," Harry said. Ron arrived. "He's down." "He's down," Harry said. Down as in he'll need a trial before anything permanent happens to him," Harry said, "and I think a trial is actually appropriate here." Hermione appeared at his elbow and immediately began producing wound-cleansing supplies from somewhere within her robes. "Hold still," she said, with the tone of someone who has been holding herself together through something very difficult and has now found a specific task to direct the energy into. Harry held still. He looked up at the Hall of Prophecy, the shelves now half empty, the glass scattered, the blue orb light reduced but still present from the ones that hadn't fallen. He thought about prophecy. About the specific version of this night that had been planned, the one where he was lured here, where his friends were taken as bait, where Sirius died, where Harry held a prophecy that told him what he'd been shaped to do and then went home and waited for the right moment to sacrifice himself. He thought about what had actually happened instead. He had come here by choice, with people who chose to come with him, and fought a war on his own terms, and won without dying, and the prophecy shelves were rubble on the floor and the future was simply open in the way that futures are when you're not building them around someone else's plan. Hermione finished with his shoulder. "Done," she said. "Thank you," Harry said. Don't get cut again, she said. That's the plan, Harry said. Behind them, the Aurors were securing Voldemort with the slightly stunned efficiency of people who have just watched the thing they'd been terrified of be made ordinary, and the Hall of Prophecy was settling into its aftermath, and somewhere in the building above them the atrium fountain was presumably still dripping its melted golden figures into the pool, and outside the Ministry of Magic was London in the dark, entirely unaware that something fundamental had just changed. Harry stood in the middle of it and was, simply and exactly, himself. It turned out that was enough. It had, he suspected, always been enough.